Chapter 22. Yes. Colin wanted to deny it, but he did not know why he chose to be honest with her. What? Vera's eyes widened and she felt as if this was the first time she had seen the young knight in front of her. Then, what about the plan? We will make it look like we are crossing the river, but in fact, we will hide in the most dangerous part of the river. Didn't you say that the most dangerous place is the safest place? That was a lie. Colin looked into the female mage's eyes. We have already fooled those wolf riders once. How can they be fooled again so easily? You. Vera took a deep breath and gradually calmed down. She was not lacking in courage, and she only lost her composure because her hope of escaping was suddenly shattered. Why are you doing this? Vera had a complicated expression on her face. The glorious image that Colin had built in her heart was collapsing. We can't run away. Colin sighed and his tone gradually became cold. From the moment you made the decision not to abandon the defeated soldiers, you should have been aware of this. This is a battlefield of life and death. There is no room for mercy and innocence. Even if my plan deceives the soldiers and makes them think that we have really crossed the river and gone north, how long can we deceive them? They are wolf riders and we have a large group of infantry on our side. By the time they realize that something is wrong after crossing the river, it will only take them 1 or 2 days to catch up with us. We can't avoid this battle. Therefore, since we cannot avoid this battle, the only thing we can do is to choose the most advantageous location for the battle. Colin pointed his finger at his feet and said, "This is the most dangerous place, but it is also the place where we have the best chance of winning." Why? Vera felt that she could no longer trust Colin. Before Colin could answer, Bliss had already opened his mouth and said, "Because there is no way for us to escape from here." That's right. Colin took a deep look at Bliss. Only a rabbit that is forced into a corner will turn around and bite back. The same goes for those defeated soldiers. If we were to be caught by the wolf riders in the open, then without a doubt, as long as the enemy charges, the scattered soldiers we gathered would definitely collapse and scatter in all directions. Therefore, they had to ensure that they had nowhere to run. Since we don't want to abandon them, we can't let them abandon us. Either we win this battle, or we die here together. Colin's powerful remarks made Vera feel very confused. She did not know how to evaluate the young knight in front of her. He didn't know if what he did was right or wrong. Whether it was her childhood in Winter City or her academic career in the Yule Tower, everything that Vera encountered was simple and beautiful. Of course, this was also because she was well protected due to her noble status. He nodded and said, "Under the circumstances at that time, the Mirror Lake camp needed a noble with sufficient prestige, a lord with a title, to stabilize the miscellaneous soldiers who were recruited at the last minute and make them resist with all their might, causing enough trouble for the trolls. This way, Marquis Charles would lead the army to attack from behind the trolls. Only with a pincer attack would there be a chance of victory. Unfortunately, Marquis Charles did not leave behind someone of sufficient importance in the Mirror Lake camp, but we will not make such a mistake." After saying this, Colin stepped forward and approached Vera. He stared into her eyes and said, "So this time, I will stay at the river bend as the first heir of the Baron of the Kingdom of Greycastle. I will live and die with the soldiers. Miss Vera, I don't know if you—" "Of course, I will also stay," Vera said without hesitation. At this time, she had decided to believe in Colin again. Of course, she had no other choice. In fact, everyone here had been plotted against by Colin. Colin nodded and turned to Bliss. "Knight Bliss, please lead the cavalry away from the river bend temporarily. When the trolls attack us, you will lead the army to attack from behind." Bliss's eyes flashed. "Why don't I stay at the river bend, and you lead the cavalry?" "No." Colin immediately rejected Bliss's proposal because he knew that Bliss was testing them. The people who stayed at the front of the battlefield would be in the most danger, but the one who led the cavalry would still have the possibility to escape. Therefore, in order to make Bliss believe in him, Colin had no choice but to choose to stay. The people who stay at the river bend need to have enough weight. I am more suitable than you to stay. Moreover, the cavalry is your subordinate, and they will be able to fight better under your leadership. Bliss's eyes changed slightly, as if he finally recognized that Colin had passed his test, and he nodded in agreement. Then, Colin glanced at Vera. I know that you have a noble status, so if you can reveal your true identity before the battle, then it will greatly encourage the soldiers. Of course, if you have any concerns, I will not force you. Vera was stunned, but she did not speak. Just when Colin thought that Vera was unwilling, he heard a clear and firm voice, "Okay." Chapter 23. Ta. As soon as Knight Bliss led the cavalry away from the river, the entire camp suddenly fell into a state of panic. The news that the troll cavalry was about to catch up with them had already spread. Everyone was already in a state of panic. Now that they thought that Bliss and the others had fled, it was as if they had poked a hornet's nest. Many people had already quietly gathered together, packed up their things, and were ready to escape. At this moment, Vera and Colin appeared in front of everyone and calmed them down temporarily. When they saw that the two nobles with the highest status in the entire camp had not left yet, everyone felt that there was still hope and that they had not been abandoned. However, the news that Knight Bliss had left and that the troll cavalry was approaching made everyone's faces full of anxiety. Everyone's nerves were stretched to the extreme and they could not withstand any more stimulation. They stared at the figures of Vera and Colin closely, hoping to get some good news from them. Most of the civilians in this era were a group of confused lambs. They were ignorant, and timid. They were unable to control their own destiny, and they did not even dare to control their own destiny. Therefore, they put their own destiny in the hands of the nobles, hoping that the nobles would guide them to prosperity and glory. However, what they did not know was that the nobles' guidance often came at the price of slavery. At this time, Vera could see the confusion and desire in everyone's eyes. Of course, she would not let them down. She did not speak. It was just a simple action, but everyone in the camp was completely stunned. She lifted her veil. The first rays of the morning sun sprinkled down, outlining the beautiful face under the veil. Time seemed to have stopped. The restless crowd held their breaths at this moment. It was as if they were afraid to disturb the beautiful, determined, and slightly shy girl. However, before everyone could enjoy this beautiful scene, Vera spoke. Even the sound of the rushing river could not drown out her soft but steady voice. My name is Vera St. Hilda, and I am the adopted daughter of the Duke of St. Hilda, the Lord of the Northern Frontier. Adopted daughter. So, she was the adopted daughter of the Dukes of the North. Colin's eyes widened, and there was a huge wave in his heart. One had to know that in this world, adopted children had the right of inheritance. Unlike those illegitimate children who were spurned by the nobles, adopted children were the legal heirs recognized by the Senate of the Empire. His right of inheritance was second only to that of the direct line of descent. Therefore, in order to become an adopted son or daughter of a noble, one must first have a pure and noble bloodline. If one of the parents was a commoner, then he or she could never be legally adopted by a noble. Secondly, if they wanted to adopt an heir, they had to pay an adoption tax to the Senate of the Imperium in exchange for the Senate's recognition of the adopted child. In order to prevent the nobles from abusing their adoption rights and disrupting the normal order of succession, the adoption tax was extremely high. Most lesser nobles would not be able to afford it even if they went bankrupt. Even for a great noble like the House of St. Hilda, paying an adoption tax would be painful for a long time. Therefore, the nobles were extremely cautious about adoption. Generally speaking, only those who were rich and did not have any children of their own would choose a descendant from the collateral branch of the family as their adopted child. This way, they could prevent their title from falling into the hands of someone they did not like. Colin did not understand why the Duke of St. Hilda, who had 3 sons, would adopt Vera and send Vera to Yevil to be trained as a mage. However, this did not affect Vera's position as the 4th heir of the Dukes of the North. This was the reason why Night Bliss had pledged his loyalty to her. This was also the reason why she was qualified to say, "My people." Therefore, when she revealed her true identity at the bend of the Rapids River, the soldiers who were originally panicking were so shocked and excited. Most of them were already holding the hilts of their swords in their hands, ready to fight to the death for her. They were all waiting for her to say those words. "I know that all of you are very scared and panicked." Vera slowly swept her eyes across the crowd and looked at them one by one. "Me too. I am scared and panicked. However, I am not desperate. Even if there is no way out now. This is because I know that all of you will not abandon me. Just like how I did not abandon all of you in the first place. No matter how critical the situation is, I will always remember my mission and my duty to all of you. As the adopted daughter of the Duke of St. Hilda, I have sworn to protect the people of the northern frontier forever. As the people of the northern frontier, I also hope that all of you will have the courage to pick up your weapons and fight with me to protect the northern frontier against the invading enemies. I promise that I will fight with all of you until the last moment. For Miss Vera." Colin stood up and shouted at the top of his lungs. Originally, he had prepared a long speech and wanted to use his identity as the son of the Baron to win the hearts of the soldiers. However, it seemed that he did not need to do so anymore. He did not even need to emphasize his identity anymore. Vera's identity was more than enough to arouse the fighting spirit of this group of soldiers. The House of St. Hilda had ruled the northern frontier for thousands of years and its prestige was unparalleled. Vera's noble identity, her beautiful face, and the kindness that she had shown throughout her journey had made her a goddess in the hearts of these soldiers. They would never allow those dirty and ugly trolls to blaspheme this goddess. Even if they had to pay the price with their lives. For Miss Vera. For Miss Vera. Fight to the death. Fight to the death. Rumble. A flash of lightning tore through the sky, followed by the roar of thunder. The rising sun did not even have time to wake up the sleeping earth before it was covered by dark clouds. At the bend of the Rapids River, the human soldiers were already waiting. They held their breaths as they looked straight ahead, allowing the raindrops to fall on their bodies. They were motionless like statues. The rain was gradually getting heavier. The wind was also gradually getting stronger. A gray line appeared on the horizon and quickly spread out like a raging tide, sweeping towards the human camp at the bend of the river. Whoa, the troll cavalry was here. Kill. For Miss Vera. For Miss Vera, facing the terrifying troll cavalry, the human soldiers burst out with courage that was not inferior to the elite soldiers of the army. This was because they knew that there was no way out for them. Since there was no way out, they would fight to the death. Moreover, Vera's existence had given these confused soldiers endless fighting spirit and firm belief. They believed that even if they died here, their stories would still be passed down in the northern frontier. Everyone would know that they had sworn to protect Vera St. Hilda. Even if the worst situation happened, they would still be lucky enough to return to the arms of the god of light together with their goddess. Kill. Colin took the lead and stood at the forefront of the battlefield. At this time, he must not back down. What greeted him was hundreds of sharp spears, like a suffocating forest of death. Boom! Colin collided with the leader of the troll cavalry without any fancy moves. After that, he felt as if he had collided with a tank. Whoosh! Colin only felt that his vision turned black, and the great pain almost made him lose his mind. He could even clearly hear the cracking sound of his bones breaking and the sound of the spears tearing his chest. He did not know how far he had been sent flying, and when he landed on the ground, he spat out a mouthful of blood. At the same time, he was depressed. He wanted to pretend to be a hero, but he did not expect, as soon as he came up, he encountered a high-level troll warrior. Fuck! Wasn't this death a little too fast? Forget it, I will just lie down and pretend to be dead, don't worry about me. Colin shouted. Hurry up and prepare the spells. The soldiers who are fighting in front of the formation need your help more than I do. Okay. Vera did not hesitate. She first helped Colin to sit on the ground before she turned around and began to cast the spells. At this time, the two sides were engaged in a fierce battle. However, Colin discovered that the troll cavalry was not able to penetrate the humans' formation. Instead, they were trapped in the formation and were tightly entangled by the soldiers who were not afraid of death. This time, he could finally breathe a sigh of relief. As long as the troll cavalry was trapped in the formation and lost their speed advantage, then the humans would have a chance to win this battle. Moreover, ta-ta-ta. The crisp sound of the horses' hooves could be heard again. It was Knight Bliss who had led the cavalry team back. This cavalry team of less than 100 people appeared at the most critical moment. They were like a sharp arrow that pierced straight into the troll army's back. The reinforcements are here. Kill them. No one knew who shouted, but the human side suddenly erupted with an amazing momentum. On the other hand, the troll army fell into chaos because they were surrounded by enemies. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. Colin only felt a sudden burst of cold air behind him. Then, he saw countless raindrops falling from the sky, instantly freezing into ice blades and smashing into the center of the troll army's formation. Vera also began to show her power. Kill that sorcerer. The troll army also realized the existence of Vera and wanted to eliminate this long-range spellcaster. However, how could the human soldiers who were fighting for the goddess let the troll army succeed? They crazily surrounded Vera and formed a human wall in front of her to block the troll army's path. Blood and bones were splattered everywhere. The battle had reached its most tragic moment. Suddenly, Colin only saw a flash of red light and a blood-red spear broke through the human wall and suddenly appeared in front of Vera. This was a good opportunity. Without the slightest hesitation, Colin leaped in front of Vera, blocking her. Chi! The spear pierced Colin's chest again. It was as if he could feel that his heart, which had stopped beating for a long time, had been shattered into pieces by the two consecutive spear strikes. Colin! Colin! Vera rushed forward and tears flowed down her face uncontrollably. Why? Why? Colin wanted to be emotional like some melodramatic television dramas, but the intense pain was about to overwhelm his will. At this time, he knew that he had to use the simplest action to leave the deepest impression in Vera's heart. Therefore, he said softly, I hope that I can bring one of your personal belongings with me when I am buried. No, you will not die. You will not die. Vera cried and shook her head. Colin stopped talking and slowly reached out his hand to touch Vera's earlobe. Vera did not stop him. She allowed Colin to take off one of her diamond earrings. Colin held the earring tightly in his palm and slowly closed his eyes. This is too painful. Colin screamed in his heart. However, he felt that his performance just now was not bad. He believed that he would be able to leave an indelible impression in Vera's heart. Moreover, through this rather ambiguous action, he also vaguely expressed his feelings of adoration. He believed that this would have a great impact on Vera, who was ignorant and inexperienced. Poor Vera did not know that the guy in her arms was pretending to be dead and was even using this opportunity to plot against her. However, after crying for a while, she immediately wiped her tears away. Now was not the time to be sad. Vera gently put Colin down and then turned around resolutely. She raised the staff in her hand high and started chanting. A powerful arcane energy began to gather around her. The rain seemed to be getting heavier. The wind seemed to be getting stronger as well. Vera's blonde hair turned pure white again. Even her blue eyes became pale white like ice that had not melted for thousands of years. An invisible force slowly lifted her up. The female mage stood proudly in mid-air and looked down at the battlefield in front of her like a god. At this moment, the extreme cold had arrived. Colin, who was on the verge of fainting, was also shivering from the cold at this time. He quietly opened one of his eyes to see what was going on. Due to the angle, he could only see Vera's robe fluttering in the air, as well as the exposed part of her, pink, ft. 2 lines of blood spurted out from his nose. Knight Colin's injury was even more serious. Chapter 25. As night fell, a bonfire lit up at the bend of the Rapids River. After a fierce battle, the humans finally won the final victory. It was a Pyrrhic victory. More than half of the original team of more than 1,000 people were killed or injured, and those who survived were all injured. However, after this battle, the momentum of this group of soldiers had changed qualitatively. It was as if they had turned into a regular army after the baptism of blood and fire. The camp was filled with a strong smell of blood, and various mutilated corpses had not been cleaned up yet. However, the survivors did not care. They enjoyed the rare hot food while bragging about their heroic performance during the day. Sar did not participate in the lively conversation of his companions. Instead, he picked up a skewer of grilled black fish and walked towards the tent in the center of the camp. His left foot seemed to be injured, and he was limping and walking with difficulty. However, such a small injury was not a problem at all in this camp. There was a knight whose upper body was covered with bandages outside the tent. Sar knew that this was the knight of the Angeli family. His name was Raymond. The knight was leaning on his sword with his head lowered and his eyes closed. He seemed to be repenting and praying at the same time. Sar walked past him, but he did not respond at all. It was as if he was a statue. "Miss Vera, do you want to eat something?" "No, it's okay." Vera did not look back, but she refused softly. Sar quietly raised his head, but he could only see Vera's beautiful back and long white hair. "You have to pay attention to your body. You should eat something." Sar was still trying to persuade her, but Vera still did not respond. She was just staring blankly at the man in front of her who seemed to have fallen asleep. That man was naturally Colin. However, Colin was not pretending to be dead to gain sympathy at this time. He had really fallen asleep. After all, the injury that he had suffered before was too serious, and he had lost too much blood. Of course, perhaps he was also stimulated by the last scene that was not suitable for children. In short, Colin had completely fallen asleep. If he was not still breathing, perhaps everyone would have thought that he was already dead. No one thought that Colin would be able to survive such a terrifying injury. In fact, in the eyes of everyone, it was already a miracle that he could endure until now. Vera was the only one who did not want to give up. She continued to bandage Colin's wounds and continued to take care of him. When Vera noticed that Colin's lips were a little dry and cracked, she quickly dipped a handkerchief in some water before she gently wiped Colin's lips with it. When Sar saw this scene, he was filled with jealousy. He even wished that he was the one who was lying on the bed and being taken care of by Vera right now. "Miss Vera, let me take care of Knight Colin. You can go and rest now." "No need." Vera rejected Sar's offer once again before she waved her hand to signal the mercenaries to leave. Sar could only bury his disappointment deep in his heart and leave the tent. Meow, Little White suddenly appeared out of nowhere and moved closer to Colin before he gently licked his cheek. It seemed as though he was trying to wake up his human slave. Vera put down her handkerchief and stared at Colin's pale face for a long time. After that, she crossed her hands and clasped them in front of her chest as though she was praying. "Almighty God of light, please have mercy on this brave and fearless knight." This was the first time in Vera's life that she had ever prayed. Perhaps, this was also the first time that she had ever prayed to the God of light. "If I am lucky enough to witness your grace and mercy, then I will serve you for the rest of my life." This female mage who had always pursued the truth of the arcane arts was now willing to offer her faith to God for a man. He wondered if the God of light had heard the mage's prayer. Would he be willing to accept such a heretic? There was no beam of light that fell from the sky. There were no angels that suddenly appeared. Colin did not wake up miraculously. It was as though nothing had happened. Knight Bliss, who had just walked out of the tent, suddenly stopped. He seemed to have realized that he might have heard something that he should not have. After a long time, when there was no more sound coming out of the tent, Bliss stepped back into the tent. This knight was also a seriously injured person. His entire right arm had been cut off, and his body was covered with bandages that were still bleeding. However, he still had a calm and indifferent expression on his face, as if he did not care about his injuries at all. "Miss, the preliminary casualty statistics have been completed. In this battle, we have lost 428 soldiers and more than 350 people are seriously injured. The rest of the soldiers have only minor injuries." Vera did not have any concept of such casualty statistics, so she just listened quietly. However, for a veteran like Knight Bliss, this battle was definitely a miracle. One had to know that such a ratio of casualties was enough to cause the entire army to collapse, even if it was the most elite regular army. However, the soldiers of the River Bend barracks fought tenaciously to the end and even won the battle. Perhaps Vera had contributed a lot to this. After all, her identity had enough appeal. However, Bliss was very clear that this was mostly due to Colin's strategy of fighting to the death. Thinking of this, he looked at Colin on the bed with a look of admiration and regret, and continued to ask, "Miss, what should we do next?" When she heard this question, Vera was a little confused. "What do you think?" "There were 2 wolf cavalry units that chased us to the Rapids River. Although we have just defeated one of them, we are not completely out of danger yet. This is because the other wolf cavalry unit has been confused by our arrangement and has already crossed the river to the north. However, I believe that they will soon discover that something is wrong and turn back. However, the victory that we have just achieved will definitely make the other party hesitate. They will not be able to figure out our specific strength and will not dare to chase after us easily. Therefore, my opinion is to continue to stay at the River Bend and send a messenger to the nearby cities to ask for reinforcements. As long as our reinforcements arrive before the trolls gather more soldiers, we will be safe." Vera was a little speechless. She could hear the uncertainty in Knight Bliss's words, but she could not come up with a better idea. At this time, she naturally turned her eyes to Colin, who was still sleeping. If he could wake up, there must be a better way. "Okay, we will do as you say." "Yes." After leaving the tent, Bliss walked with his head down. He was considering which directions he should send the messengers to, and how he could avoid being intercepted by the trolls on the way. Da-da-da, the sound of horse hooves interrupted Bliss's thoughts. He raised his head and saw 2 cavalrymen running towards the camp. He quickly recognized that one of the cavalrymen was the one that he had sent to guard the perimeter. However, he did not know the other person. However, he recognized the armor that the other person was wearing. This kind of pure black armor was only worn by one army in the entire Empire of Light. The Black Cavalry. Bliss was ecstatic. He couldn't help but look back at Vera's tent as a thought flashed through his mind. Did the God of Light really answer Mrs. Prayer? Chapter 26. Have you heard? The Black Cavalry is nearby. They will send someone to pick us up soon. The Black Cavalry? Is that true? Of course it's true. Last night, I saw a scout from the Black Cavalry enter our camp. Miss Vera even personally received him. So, we are safe. Nonsense. With the Black Cavalry nearby, how would the trolls have the guts to come? Similar conversations were going on in every corner of the camp. The tense atmosphere in the air was completely swept away, and it was replaced by the excitement of surviving a calamity. It was as if the name, Black Cavalry, had some kind of special magic power. As long as they were nearby, it meant that they were absolutely safe. The reason was very simple. The Black Cavalry was the most powerful army in the northern frontier of the Empire. Yes, they were the most powerful. The number of people in this army was actually not that big. There were only 50,000 of them. However, this was an army made up of pure cavalry. This army of 50,000 cavalry was worthy of being the guardian of the northern frontier. It was also a nightmare that the trolls could not get rid of. Dong dong dong, as noon approached, the earth suddenly began to tremble. A black torrent appeared on the horizon and quickly rushed towards the river bend camp. However, the people in the camp did not panic at all. This was because they had already seen the flag of a black lion fluttering in the wind. The emblem of the House of St. Hilda, the master of the northern frontier, was a golden lion. Therefore, no other family in the northern frontier dared to use a lion as their emblem. The person who came was naturally from the House of St. Hilda. However, the average person from the House of St. Hilda would not dare to change the golden lion's emblem to black. There was only one exception. He was the younger brother of the current Dukes of the North and the highest commander of the Black Cavalry, Marquis Garcia St. Hilda. Unlike the eldest son of the Duke, Marquis Charles, who had a fake title, Marquis Garcia was a feudal lord. He was also the only marquis on the northern frontier. His territory occupied almost a quarter of the entire northern frontier. It was this vast land that allowed Marquis Garcia to support the Black Cavalry, an army of pure cavalry. As the army approached, Vera also came out to greet them personally. Behind her, there were excited and even fanatical soldiers. In the northern frontier, almost all aspiring youths viewed joining the Black Cavalry as the highest honor. However, the Black Cavalry's recruitment standards were extremely strict. It was so strict that it made people wonder if the Black Cavalry didn't want any more recruits. Huff huff huff, amidst the neighing of the horses, the Black Cavalry started to slow down. The leading knight in a black cloak lifted the visor of his helmet, revealing a dignified face. Uncle Garcia. Vera could not help but shout out loud as tears flashed in her eyes. The hardships, fights, and parting of life and death that she had encountered along the way had drained the 18-year-old noble girl both mentally and physically. Now that she had finally seen her pillar of support, she could not help but lose her composure. Marquis Garcia dismounted from his horse and walked in front of Vera with a gentle smile on his face. Welcome home. Vera did not care about maintaining the aristocratic etiquette anymore. She quickly took a few steps forward and threw herself into the arms of Marquis Garcia. Ha ha ha. Marquis Garcia suddenly laughed out loud as he stretched out his hand and patted Vera's back gently. It seems that you were really frightened by the trolls. Don't be afraid, Uncle will avenge you. Uncle, Vera suddenly felt a little embarrassed. Don't worry, those trolls who invaded the northern frontier will not be able to return alive. Marquis Garcia looked at Vera's white hair and his eyes flashed with a cold light. That's what I said. When such arrogant words came out of Marquis Garcia's mouth, it sounded particularly natural. No one present dared to doubt whether Marquis Garcia had the ability to fulfill his promise or not. This Marquis who commanded the Black Cavalry was like a god on the battlefield. Greetings, Marquis Garcia. Knight Bliss also hurriedly stepped forward and saluted. Knight Bliss. Marquis Garcia noticed that the other party's right arm was missing. It is a pity that you have lost an arm, my opponent is even more regretful because he has lost his head. Ha ha ha. Good. This is what a knight of the northern frontier should be like. Marquis Garcia thumped Bliss's chest a few times and did not hide his appreciation for him at all. Knight Bliss, who had always been calm and even indifferent, at this time, showed a rare look of respect and even fanaticism in front of the god of war of the northern frontier. Not to mention the soldiers behind him, most of them were seeing the legendary Marquis of the northern frontier for the first time. All of them were so excited that their faces turned red, as if they were waiting for Marquis Garcia's order to kill the trolls. Even Sar, who had always been a filial son, was almost unable to control himself when he looked at Marquis Garcia's tall figure at this time. I want to be like him too. Sar secretly vowed in his heart. After Marquis Garcia appeased the fanatical soldiers, Vera finally had time to step forward and ask. Uncle, there are still many wounded people in the camp. Please immediately arrange for doctors and priests to treat them. In addition, there is also a knight who is seriously injured. Don't worry, after I receive the news, I specially brought the doctors and priests who were accompanying the army. Marquis Garcia pointed to an old priest with gray hair behind him and introduced him to Vera. I even brought Archbishop Raven with me. It is my honor to be able to serve you. Archbishop Raven bowed to Vera. Then I will have to trouble you. Vera was relieved. Although she did not know Archbishop Raven, she knew that the position of an archbishop was not something that an ordinary priest could hold. In the entire northern frontier, the Church of Glory had only arranged 3 archbishops. The profession of a priest was not a fighting profession, and their combat power was not strong. Their main job, in addition to serving the God of glory and spreading the glory of the Lord, was to preside over baptisms and treat the sick and the wounded. It was a standard auxiliary profession. Therefore, unlike other combat professions such as warriors, knights, and mages, this profession could not be divided by strength. However, generally speaking, the higher a priest's position in the church, the stronger his healing ability would be. In Vera's opinion, this Archbishop Raven should be the God of Glory's response to her prayers. Therefore, she did not dare to hesitate and quickly led Archbishop Raven and others to the tent where Colin was. Marquis Garcia also followed. He was very curious about the background of the knight who could make his niece so nervous. When they arrived outside the tent, Vera and Raven went straight in. However, Marquis Garcia stopped in his tracks. What is your name? He had already noticed the man who had been standing outside the tent. Previously, when everyone had gathered around to welcome him, this man was the only one who had stayed behind and refused to budge an inch. Dear Marquis, my name is Raymond Malben, and I am a knight of the Angeli family. Then the one inside is the son of the Baron, Knight Colin Angeli. Marquis Garcia nodded and patted Raymond's shoulder twice to comfort him, and then walked into the tent. How is Knight Colin's injury? Not very good. Archbishop Raven frowned and said, in fact, it is a miracle that he is still alive with such an injury. Please do your best. Vera pleaded from the side. Raven glanced at Vera, and then looked back at Marquis Garcia. He then took out a delicate small bottle. Then, I can only try the holy water. Chapter 27. Colin had a dream. It was a very long dream. In the dream, he was entangled by a huge silver python. Moreover, it was getting tighter and tighter. The terrifying pressure crushed his bones and internal organs, and even his blood was being squeezed out. He felt like an orange that had been thrown into a juicer. He was afraid that becoming a dried corpse was his unavoidable fate. Of course, Colin was unwilling to give in. But his limbs were tightly entangled, and he could not move at all. So, he could only bite the python's body. And suck crazily. If you squeeze me, then I'll suck you too. This was Colin's plan. However, he found a serious problem: he couldn't suck anything. The python's body seemed to be empty, and there was nothing in it. As time passed, Colin's consciousness gradually blurred. The python's body gradually tightened, and Colin was getting closer and closer to the dried corpse. He didn't know how much time had passed. Just when Colin was about to give up resisting, he suddenly found that he could suck blood from the snake's body. It was as if a long drought suddenly fell on the earth. That mouthful was sweet. It was the taste of vitality. However, there was only one mouthful. Colin tried his best to drink milk, but he couldn't suck any more. Under extreme anger, Colin woke up. Great! Colin, you're finally awake. Colin opened his eyes, but he could only see a blurry shadow. He could vaguely recognize that it should be Vera's voice just now. What am I drinking? Colin opened his mouth, wanting to drink more. You're drinking holy water. Holy water? Colin was stunned. You're giving a vampire holy water to drink? Before he could breathe, Colin fainted again. Colin? Vera was a little anxious and looked at Archbishop Raven for help. The archbishop calmly opened Colin's mouth and poured a few drops of holy water into it. Then, there was no reaction. The archbishop refused to believe it and poured a few more drops into his mouth. There was still no reaction. The archbishop gritted his teeth and gulped down the entire bottle. He then looked at the empty bottle with a pained expression. After all, the water he gave Colin was pure holy water. Normally, the holy water used by the church for treatment was diluted 1,000 times with water. Although he only had a small bottle in his hand, after dilution, it was enough for a parish to use for a whole year. But even so, there was still no reaction. The archbishop checked Colin's breathing, then pried open Colin's eyelids to take a look. After fiddling with it for a while, he said in an uncertain tone, his injuries seem to have stabilized. He should be fine after some rest. Vera heaved a sigh of relief and quickly thanked him. When Marquis Garcia and the others saw this, they left the tent and let Colin rest. Vera was the only one who stayed behind. When Marquis Garcia saw this, he did not say anything, but he frowned slightly. After leaving the tent, he asked Knight Bliss, "Tell me about Knight Colin." "Yes, sir." Bliss followed behind Marquis Garcia and explained, "He is the son of Baron Angelo, the lord of Greycastle town. He was on the way to Eagle City with a mercenary group when he was sent to Mirror Lake Camp by Marquis Charles." "Mercenary group?" Marquis Garcia was a little confused. He is the son of a baron, why would he follow a mercenary group to Eagle City? It should be to hide his identity. I asked the son of the leader of the mercenary group, and he said that Knight Colin used the false identity of the son of the Sioux duo Viscounts to sneak into the mercenary group. Bliss had indeed checked Colin's identity and origin, and the filial son Sar obviously would not help Colin hide anything, so he told him everything truthfully. "Is the Angeli family close to the Sioux duo family?" "As far as I know, the two families do not have much contact. However, recently, the territory of the Sioux duo Viscounts has been occupied by the trolls, so Colin probably thought that pretending to be a knight of this family would not be easy to be seen through, and he would not be investigated." Marquis Garcia nodded and made his own judgment, yes. Pretending to be an identity, and no one from the Angeli family following him. "I am afraid that something has happened to the Angeli family." Bliss thought for a moment, and then he provided another piece of information. "Sir, Baron Angelo unfortunately died in battle when he was following Marquis Charles." "That's right." Marquis Garcia smiled indifferently. "I guess it is a matter of the inheritance of the Baron. There is nothing else new." Obviously, the fight for the Baron's title would not attract Marquis Garcia's attention, so he mentioned it lightly, but did not ask any more questions. Instead, he let Bliss continue his story. Miss Vera also happened to be on the way back to the northern frontier when she received the conscription order, and she also came to the Mirror Lake camp. As Bliss spoke, he observed Marquis Garcia's reaction. Especially when he mentioned that Marquis Charles used all the urgently recruited soldiers as bait, Bliss looked at Marquis Garcia with a slightly nervous look. Marquis Garcia was expressionless. "We fled all the way to the south, but we could not get rid of the wolf cavalry behind us. Knight Colin suggested that we turn around and go to the north, in the direction where the wolf cavalry least expected to break through. On the way to the north, we encountered the defeated soldiers who escaped from the Mirror Lake battlefield. After gathering the defeated soldiers, we were gradually caught up with. Colin suggested that we hide in the bay of the Rapids River and arrange some soldiers. In the end, we had no choice but to fight back, and we won." After Bliss finished speaking, he stood quietly aside, waiting for Marquis Garcia's instructions. Marquis Garcia looked at the turbulent Rapids River in front of him, but he did not speak. After a long time, he asked, "What kind of person do you think Knight Colin is?" Bliss was stunned, but he quickly said bluntly, "Brave, loyal, intelligent, and a person who was born to be on the battlefield." Garcia smiled noncommittally. "It seems that you have a high opinion of him." Bliss nodded solemnly. If it was before the battle at the bay of the Rapids River, Bliss's impression of Colin was not very good. This was because although Colin showed a very high sense of the battlefield, after all, he had lied and wanted to abandon the defeated soldiers. However, after the battle at the bay of the Rapids River, Bliss's impression of Colin had completely changed. Whether it was giving up the last chance to escape and choosing to stay, or fighting in the front row of the battlefield, or risking his life to block a bullet for Vera, the glorious image that he had shown made the previous small flaws seem insignificant. Therefore, Bliss was willing to put in a few good words for Colin in front of Marquis Garcia. He could see that the Marquis also had some appreciation for Colin. He is indeed a talented general. Marquis Garcia nodded, but he frowned slightly. However, he is a little bit off track. Fortunately, he is still young. Looking at the puzzled Bliss, the Marquis did not explain too much. Instead, he changed the topic. Well, let's not talk about him. This time, I am here to clean up Charles's mess. So, I need you to do something for me. Please tell me. I will give you a team of cavalry. Go to Coldwinter City immediately to meet my brother and ask him for a military order for me. What military order? Send troops to support them. The trolls are already at home. How can I sit back and do nothing? Send troops? Bliss was a little puzzled, but he immediately reacted and his face turned pale in an instant. Didn't you receive the Duke's order to send troops to support them? No. Marquis Garcia looked at Bliss with interest. I sent troops without permission. Bliss only felt a chill run down his spine, and a terrible thought emerged in his mind uncontrollably. However, he still lowered his head and said in a deep voice. Yes, Marquis. I will set off now. Chapter 28. Colin woke up. He looked around and found that he was still in the original tent. He did not know how many days he had been in a coma. He could only judge from the surrounding light that it was night time. In addition to him, there was one other person in the tent, Vera. She was lying quietly on the edge of the bed, seemingly asleep. Colin looked at Vera's white hair, and there was a trace of warmth in his heart. It was undeniable that his previous actions were indeed a show by relying on his undying body. But it seemed that he had gone a little too far. Now that he thought about it, when he was injured for the first time, he was still able to control the injury. But the second time, when he blocked the bullet for Vera, he could not control it anymore. The severe pain and the severe wound made Colin unable to stop the bleeding in time. In addition, he also saw some scenes that were not suitable for children. In short, Colin felt that this accident should be caused by excessive blood loss. It seemed that he must stop the bleeding immediately if he was injured in the future. Colin secretly warned himself. Then, he remembered that he seemed to have woken up once before. Moreover, at that time, there was a priest pouring holy water into his mouth. However, the holy water did not seem to cause any harm to him. Instead, it helped him recover from his injuries. No. It was not just recovering from his injuries. Colin carefully felt the changes in his body. He found that his body was slightly hot, just like the situation when he drank Knight Carter's blood. Could it be that the holy water could also help him improve his strength? This was interesting. Colin suppressed the ecstasy in his heart and decided to wait a few more days to see if his strength really improved. If the holy water really had the same effect as the knight's blood, then, the vampire settings in this world were a bit strange. Or, there was something wrong with the holy water of the Church of Brilliance. Also, there was the silver python that he had dreamed of in his coma. It seemed that it was not just an inexplicable dream. He always felt that the taste of the blood of the giant python was a bit too real. It was so real that it did not feel like a dream. Colin lay on the bed, his thoughts running wild. He had just woken up from a coma and could not sleep. So, he waited until dawn with his eyes open. Good morning, Miss Vera. Ah, Colin, you're awake. When Colin saw the genuine surprise in Vera's eyes, he felt a little guilty in his heart. Was it really a good idea to deceive such a naive little girl? But soon, Colin shook off this thought. After all, although he had planned to play dead, he had almost succeeded. Therefore, Vera's good impression of him could be said to have been exchanged with his life. According to the plot of a melodramatic TV drama, Vera should have already given herself to him by now. How long have I been unconscious? 3 whole days. So long. That's right. It's all thanks to Archbishop Riven's holy water. Colin secretly remembered Raven's name, and at the same time inquired, then I must thank him. I wonder why Archbishop Riven is here. He came here with my uncle, Marquis Garcia. By the way, my uncle brought the Black Cavalry to support us, so we are safe. Marquis Garcia is here too. Then we are indeed safe. Yes. You must be hungry, right? I'll go and find you something to eat. Vera said as she got up and walked out of the tent. Looking at the girl's graceful figure, Colin suddenly felt that this injury was not a loss. Meow, Little White also found that his human slave had woken up. He excitedly came over and licked Colin a few times, and then found a comfortable position on the bed and continued to sleep. Colin touched the kitten's soft fur and began to search for information about Marquis Garcia in his mind. Then, he found that his predecessor was actually an admirer of Marquis Garcia. Well, who was not a young man of his age in the northern frontier? However, Colin also found some interesting things from his memory. For example, although Marquis Garcia was the first person in the Northern Frontier Army, and the Black Cavalry in his hands was also an invincible army. However, he had already retired from the front line against the trolls 3 years ago. Although it was Marquis Garcia who took the initiative to retire from the front line, and he also advertised that he wanted to take a vacation and let the Black Cavalry soldiers take a break. However, in the eyes of discerning people, this official story was obviously not the truth of the matter. There was only one reason why Marquis Garcia retired from the front line: suspicion. Suspicion from the Dukes of the North. Although there was no such thing as a high merit overshadowing the master in this world, the truth was the same. There was no difference in people's hearts. The prestige of Marquis Garcia and the strength of the Black Cavalry had made the Dukes of the North restless. Even if Marquis Garcia was the younger brother of the Dukes of the North. However, in the face of power, not to mention brothers, even father and son were unreliable. A terrifying force like the Black Cavalry could make the trolls not dare to set foot in the northern frontier. They could also sweep across the northern frontier and change the owner of chilly Winter City. Therefore, Marquis Garcia was transferred away from the front line. The sharp blade of the Black Cavalry was also forced to be sheathed. The one who replaced him at the front line was the eldest son of the Dukes of the North, Marquis Charles. The Dukes of the North obviously hoped that their son could take over this heavy responsibility and hone a powerful army for the northern frontier. An army that truly belonged to the House of St. Hilda. This was to balance the influence of Marquis Garcia. Unfortunately, Marquis Charles was a little disappointing. He had held on for 3 years at the front line, but in the end, he could not hold on. The trolls had attacked. Therefore, Marquis Garcia had to be used again. However, Colin was a little worried. If Marquis Garcia lived up to expectations this time and once again defeated the trolls like he had repeated countless times, then, how would the Duke of St. Hilda reward his meritorious subject? It was impossible to promote his title. Above the Marquis was the Duke. And the northern frontier could only have one Duke. As for the territory, the size of Marquis Garcia's territory had far exceeded the standard of an ordinary marquis. Moreover, more territory meant more taxes and more people, which also meant greater military potential. Although the Black Cavalry was powerful, it also cost a lot to support them. Therefore, their scale had never exceeded 50,000 people. But if they were given more nutrients and allowed to continue to expand, that would be even more difficult to deal with. Thinking of this, Colin suddenly felt a little sympathy for Vera's adoptive father. Asking the black cavalry to come to the rescue showed that the situation at the front line was really critical, but it was inevitable that it was like drinking poison to quench one's thirst. Of course, if Colin knew that Marquis Garcia sent troops without the Duke's order this time, he would be even more worried. Chapter 29. On the seventh day after Colin woke up, the black cavalry finally set out again. However, the speed of the army was very slow. It was so slow that it did not seem like an elite cavalry at all. This speed was very suitable for Colin. After all, he had not fully recovered from his injuries. He didn't know where Raymond had gotten his hands on a flatbed trailer, but he had covered it with some straw to cushion it. Colin felt quite comfortable lying on it. The spring sun was warm and gentle, making people sleepy. Even though Colin, as a vampire, didn't like the sun, he slowly began to doze off under the sun. Although he was in the most elite army on the northern frontier, Colin still felt like he was on a vacation. Vera was not nearby. After all, she was the adopted daughter of the Dukes of the North. Even if she had a good impression of Colin, she would not stay by his side all the time. Otherwise, wouldn't he be a bootlicker? Even if he wanted to bootlick, Colin should be the one taking the initiative. After all, Vera's identity was much nobler than Colin's. However, looking at Colin's expression, it was obvious that he did not intend to strike while the iron was hot. Flirting with a girl was a must. This was the painful lesson that Colin had learned from his failed bootlicker career in his previous life. Just like that, the army leisurely marched north. As they gradually approached the Mirror Lake camp, they encountered more and more defeated soldiers. Marquis Garcia did not refuse any of them. He gathered all of them and arranged them to be auxiliary soldiers at the rear of the army. From these defeated soldiers, Colin slowly learned more about the details of Marquis Charles's defeat. This war had actually started last year. At the beginning of May last year, under the leadership of the troll prince Gambic Vulcan, an army of 300,000 trolls gathered at the border and were ready to move south. On the northern frontier, Marquis Charles led an army of 200,000 to fight against the trolls. Out of the 200,000 soldiers, 100,000 of them came from the House of St. Hilda's personal army, the Golden Lion Legion. The other 100,000 were the private armies of the various lords of the northern frontier. For example, Colin's father, Baron Angeli, personally led 3,000 soldiers to the front line after receiving the order from the Duke of St. Hilda. Although they were at a disadvantage in terms of numbers, the humans were not at a disadvantage in terms of momentum. After all, in recent decades, the northern frontier had never lost a battle against the trolls. In particular, the commander of the troll army, Prince Gambic, was an old acquaintance of Marquis Garcia who had beaten him to the ground in various postures. Under such circumstances, it was inevitable for the northern frontier to lower their guard. But most people didn't realize, or were unwilling to admit, that Marquis Garcia and his black cavalry were the guarantee of victory on the northern frontier. Now that this guarantee of victory had disappeared, could Marquis Charles alone bear the burden of guarding the border? Obviously, things did not develop according to the northern frontier's expectations. From the beginning of the confrontation, Marquis Charles seemed to be unable to do anything. In the small-scale probing battles, Marquis Charles was in dire straits and exhausted. At this time, the troll commander, Prince Gambic, had already figured out the true situation of the Duke's son and understood that Marquis Charles's ability to command the battlefield could not be compared to the previous Marquis. As a result, the trolls gradually strengthened their attacks, and in the winter of last year, they broke through the defensive line set up by the Northern Alliance and killed their way in. Marquis Charles retreated until he was near Mirror Lake. There, he issued an emergency conscription order and placed the recruited soldiers in the Mirror Lake camp as bait while he led the main army to ambush nearby. Then, when the troll attacked the Mirror Lake camp, Marquis Charles led the army to attack from behind. Unfortunately, he still failed. Other than the two fatal errors in Colin's analysis, there was another important reason for Marquis Charles's defeat: his plan was seen through by the troll in advance. It was not known if Prince Gambique really had great foresight, or if he had discovered the tracks of Marquis Charles's army, or if someone had leaked military secrets. In short, when the troll attacked the Mirror Lake camp, they did not attack with the whole army. Instead, they arranged the main forces at the back and waited for Marquis Charles to enter the trap. Thus, Marquis Charles was defeated again. The 200,000-strong army was almost wiped out in this series of defeats. Even Marquis Charles himself was being chased by the troll and his whereabouts were unknown. Oh, no. Marquis Charles's whereabouts were soon clear. On the 13th day after the Black Cavalry left the Rapids River, they met with a large-scale, defeated army. This defeated army had about 5,000 people, and the one leading this defeated army was Marquis Charles. Behind them, there was a troll army of about 8,000 people chasing after them. However, when this army saw the flag of the Black Cavalry from afar, they decisively turned around and gave up the chase. They did not even have the courage to test the attack. Marquis Charles was finally saved. However, his tragic fate had just begun. After knowing that Marquis Charles was in this defeated army, Colin also left the trailer and prepared to watch the show. Colin definitely did not have a good impression of this Marquis Charles. First of all, the death of his cheap father was most likely caused by this fellow's mistakes in command. This also led to the death of his predecessor and the assassination of Knight Carter. Furthermore, after he escaped from Greycastle town, he was sent to the Mirror Lake camp by Marquis Charles's emergency conscription order to be bait. Then, there was this series of pursuit and near-death experience. Therefore, when Colin saw Marquis Charles's current sorry state, he gloated. "Uncle," at this moment, Marquis Charles was half kneeling in front of Marquis Garcia with a gloomy expression. Although the two of them were both marquises, their status was worlds apart. Furthermore, this series of defeats completely caused Marquis Charles to fall from his pedestal. Furthermore, it also highlighted the importance of Marquis Garcia. "You fought a good battle." Marquis Garcia did not let Charles get up. Instead, he scolded him with a cold face. "Uncle, I was careless, Pa." Under everyone's gaze, Marquis Garcia directly whipped Charles, who was trying to find an excuse, to the ground. The entire place was silent. Some timid people even lowered their heads and did not dare to look again. Although Marquis Garcia was Marquis Charles's elder, he was still the first successor of the Duke and the future Lord of the Northern Frontier. He had actually been whipped in front of so many people, bastard. A loss is a loss. Other than being useless, what other reason do you have? When Charles heard this, his entire body trembled. He immediately crawled at the feet of Marquis Garcia and shouted, "Uncle, I was wrong. I was wrong. I've let down the house of St. Hilda, I've let down the dead soldiers, I've let down the people of the Northern Frontier, boo-hoo." A dignified Marquis, the future Lord of the Northern Frontier, actually in public, cried. Chapter 30. After nightfall, the temperature began to drop. The spring night in the Northern Frontier was also quite cold. In the camp, the soldiers lit a bonfire to warm themselves and boil water to cook. At the same time, they began to chat. The content was, of course, the meeting between the two marquises during the day, Marquis Garcia's whip, and Marquis Charles's cry. Colin blended in among these soldiers in a low-key manner, listening to their idle chatter. Then he suddenly realized that the attitude of these soldiers towards Marquis Charles had an unexpected change. Before today, these soldiers, especially the defeated soldiers who escaped from the Mirror Lake battlefield, had an extremely bad attitude towards Marquis Charles. Contempt, disgust, disdain. Of course, it was not surprising for a defeated general to have such a bad reputation. Moreover, this Marquis Charles had also issued an emergency conscription order and used the people who were recruited as cannon fodder. It could be said that if he was not the eldest son of the Duke, if it was not for the House of St. Hilda's reputation in the Northern Frontier, Marquis Charles would have been swallowed alive by these angry soldiers. However, Marquis Charles's cry during the day seemed to have gradually changed the direction of public opinion. Colin listened carefully to the discussion of the soldiers and gradually came back to his senses. He did not know whether Marquis Charles's cry was a display of his true feelings or a political show. However, it did have the demeanor of a big-eared Lou. That person was an expert in this aspect. The more he cried, the more he would win the hearts of the people. In addition, regarding Marquis Garcia's whip, Colin felt that there was a deep meaning behind it. At that time, Colin's first impression of this was only one word: domineering. This whip was not only aimed at Marquis Charles, but also at the Duke of St. Hilda's face. Colin originally thought that this was Marquis Garcia venting his dissatisfaction with the Duke. After all, this fiasco was ultimately because the Duke had hidden the Black Cavalry back then. But now that he thought about it, it also meant to help Marquis Charles get rid of the blame. I have already whipped him in public, so you should not resent him anymore. That was the gist of it. From the looks of it, Marquis Garcia was actually taking care of Marquis Charles. While Colin was lost in his thoughts, a soldier suddenly came up behind him. "Knight Colin, Marquis Charles invites you in." Colin was shocked. He hadn't expected the Marquis to come looking for him. "All right, please lead the way." Colin wondered why Marquis Charles was looking for him as he followed the soldiers all the way to a luxurious tent in the middle of the camp. "Greetings, Marquis." As the first successor of the Angeli family, Marquis Charles was qualified to receive Colin's kowtow. "Knight Colin, please rise." Marquis Charles quickly stepped forward and pulled Colin up affectionately. This Marquis looked to be in his 30s. His face was weathered, and his naked upper body was wrapped in bandages. It was unknown whether he had really suffered so many injuries or if he was just putting on a show. However, Colin didn't care about this. He wasn't like those soldiers who would be forgiven and sympathized with just a few cries from the higher-ups. "May I know what orders the Marquis has for me?" Colin discreetly shook off Marquis Charles's overly affectionate hands and bowed as he asked. Marquis Charles didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned around and took a two-handed sword from a guard, solemnly handing it over to Colin. "I'm sorry, Knight Colin. Your father, Baron Angeli, unfortunately died in the front lines. It's all my fault. This is his sword, please. My condolences." Marquis Charles started sobbing again as he spoke. Colin couldn't help but admire his acting skills. His tears came at the drop of a hat, much better than some of the dead-faced young hunks. "Marquis Charles, don't be like this. My father sacrificed his life for the country, it's his honor, not your fault." Colin also tried his best to squeeze out a few tears, his face impassioned. "I swear that I will kill all the invading trolls and avenge my father. Please give me this opportunity, Marquis Charles." Marquis Charles's eyes lit up, obviously not expecting Colin to be so tactful and cooperative. He held Colin's hands and said loudly, "Don't worry, Knight Colin. I promise you that I will kill all these damn trolls and avenge Baron Angeli and the other soldiers of the northern frontier who sacrificed their lives." Colin suppressed the disgust in his heart and said, "Thank you, Marquis Charles. This is what I should do, Knight Colin." The two of them held hands and looked at each other with tears in their eyes. The atmosphere gradually became a little more intimate. After a long time, the two film kings finally calmed down from the atmosphere just now. Marquis Charles collected his emotions and pulled Colin to sit down together with him. "Knight Colin, I heard from Vera about your experience of escaping, so on behalf of my father and the House of St. Hilda, I want to thank you for protecting Vera from the trolls." "This is what I should do." Marquis Charles nodded, and then his tone suddenly became a little ambiguous. "Knight Colin, from my sister's story, I can clearly feel that she values you. Moreover, I heard that she personally begged Archbishop Raven to treat you with pure holy water. Ha, I have never seen my sister value another man so much in all these years. Miss Vera's kindness, I will never be able to repay it." Colin understood that Marquis Charles probably saw his military talent from Vera's narration, and that was why he wanted to buy people's hearts now. However, if Marquis Charles had extended an olive branch to him before this battle, Colin would not hesitate to be loyal to him. But now, Colin would not easily get on this broken boat that was in danger of capsizing. However, Knight Colin, even if you inherit the title of Baron of the Angeli family, I am afraid that if you want to marry my sister, you will not be able to. Marquis Charles continued speaking, as if he was speaking from the bottom of his heart. Marquis Charles, how would I dare to have such thoughts? Miss Vera is a goddess-like figure. How would I dare to blaspheme her? Colin would not admit that he had such thoughts. Ha, Knight Colin, you don't have to belittle yourself like this. Marquis Charles smiled and waved his hand. With your talent, you will definitely be able to make contributions on the battlefield, and it will not be difficult for you to be promoted. Marquis Charles, you are overpraising me. Fighting for the northern frontier is my lifelong wish, and I dare not ask for more. Colin felt a little despised in his heart. This Marquis Charles actually used his sister as a bargaining chip to buy people's hearts. What's more, Colin did not believe that Marquis Charles had much say in Vera's marriage. Of course, Marquis Charles may not really want to help Colin marry his sister. The promise of such a political figure was as unreliable as the boss's, do well, and I will definitely give you a promotion and a raise in the future. Therefore, Colin was flattered on the surface, and even showed some attachment, but he was secretly vigilant in his heart. Marquis Charles did not seem to see Colin's perfunctory attitude, and he still treated him warmly. The two talked for a long time, and it was as if they regretted not having met earlier. It was not until late at night that Colin got up and said goodbye. Marquis Charles personally sent him out of the tent. Just as Colin was about to bow and say goodbye, Marquis Charles suddenly looked behind Colin and said in surprise. Huh? Sister, it is so late, and you are not asleep yet. Chapter 31. Colin turned around and saw Vera standing not far away from him. Under the cold moonlight, Colin was surprised to find that the Duke's adopted daughter was not wearing the loose mage robe. Instead, she had changed into a pure white noble dress. Her long blonde hair was still wet and it seemed that she had just finished bathing. Her sea-blue eyes sparkled with a mesmerizing halo, revealing a trace of surprise after seeing Colin. I couldn't sleep, so I came out to take a walk. Didn't you sleep too? Ha, I just exchanged my experience with Knight Colin about fighting against the trolls. Marquis Charles patted Colin's shoulder and gave him an ambiguous look. I will go to sleep first. You two can talk. After saying this, Marquis Charles decisively went back to his tent, leaving Colin and Vera alone. Colin suddenly realized that he had not seen Vera for a long time after his injury got better. Looking at the delicate face of the other party, Colin suddenly smiled and made a bold evaluation. Your dress is much better than the mage robe. Indeed, the mage robe was too loose and it could not highlight Vera's beautiful figure. When she heard Colin's rather explicit and slightly rude evaluation, Vera's face faintly flushed. She glared at Colin fiercely but did not reprimand him. Of course, Colin would not be scared off by a glare. A woman's non-forceful resistance was actually a form of encouragement. Therefore, Colin greeted her and stood side by side with Vera. The night was quiet, and only the faint sound of insects could be heard. Vera raised her head and stared at the bright moon, as if she didn't realize that there was a man beside her. Colin did not break the rare silence and he also looked up at the moon. There was a faint fragrance in the air. It seemed to be roses. What was the flower language of roses? Colin began to let his imagination run wild again. You know my brother? Vera suddenly said. She felt that the atmosphere at the moment was too ambiguous and she was not used to it. No, this is our first time meeting. But you two seem to be very familiar with each other. That's because we get along well. Is that so? Yes. Colin stopped talking and continued to look at the moon in the sky, as if it was something more attractive than the beauty beside him. The two of them fell silent again. Vera was waiting for Colin to speak, but Colin was waiting for Vera to speak instead. He purposely created silence to make the women feel awkward so that they could not help but take the initiative to break the silence. This was a simple and practical trick to pick up girls. Don't be afraid that women will be angry. As long as it was used properly, they wouldn't. On the contrary, she would find such a cold man even more attractive. On the other hand, those men who always took the initiative to find topics to talk about were noisy. Women usually called these men lapdog. What are you holding in your hand? Sure enough, Vera opened her mouth again. Colin was happy, but he put on a sad expression on his face and said in a deep voice, "This is my father's legacy." "Ah, I'm sorry." Vera's heart ached and she quickly apologized. "My condolences." Colin heaved a sigh of relief and it seemed like he wanted to squeeze out a few more tears. However, he did not succeed. No matter how good an actor was, he still needed a good partner. At this time, Colin suddenly missed Marquis Charles. "I'm fine. It was my father's lifelong wish to die on the battlefield. It is also the best ending for the knights on the northern frontier." Baron Angeli was a great knight. Vera bowed slightly and paid her respects to the sword in Colin's hand. "May the God of Light bless his soul." Colin was stunned. He almost suspected that he was hallucinating. The female mage in front of him was actually praying to the God of Light. Was this still the same heretic who only believed in the truth and not the gods? Vera raised her head and saw Colin's shocked face. She immediately realized why the other party was surprised. She explained softly, "My lord, yes, I have decided to serve the God of Light." Really? Vera nodded her head gently with a firm and sincere expression on her face. Why? Colin still could not believe it. He knew that if a mage became a believer of the God of Light, it would cause a lot of trouble. The mages in Yevil would go crazy. I just felt that the previous experience of escaping was too thrilling. It was as if the gods were protecting me. Therefore, I have decided to convert to the God of Light. Vera's eyes were a little evasive, and there was a strange blush on her face. This female mage was obviously not good at lying, and Colin could easily see through her lies. However, he was not stupid enough to expose her lies. "You have made the right choice. The God of Light deserves everyone's sincere service." Colin responded with a sincere expression on his face. At the same time, he could not help but wonder if the Duke of St. Hilda had already planned for Vera to go to Yevil to study arcane magic and then return to the northern frontier to serve the God of Light. But why? Was it really a wise move to intensify the conflict between the nobles and the mages at this time? Vera seemed to have seen through Colin's worries and she quickly explained. "Don't worry, I will not publicly announce that I have become a believer of the God of Light. I do not want to cause any unnecessary trouble." Colin heaved a sigh of relief. However, he could not help but be curious about the real reason why Vera had changed her faith. Of course, Vera would not tell Colin the real reason. At least not now. She seemed to have thought of something shameful, and her little face turned red. Of course, this attracted Colin's attention. However, before Colin could ask her any questions, Vera quickly said goodbye to Colin and ran back to her tent. She looked like a frightened deer. Colin looked at Vera's back as he recalled the cute and shy look on her face. He could not help but touch his chin. Then, he thought to himself. Is my charm really that great? It must be because my face is so similar to the reader's face. After feeling proud of himself, Colin walked back to his tent. Knight of Con. Halfway back, a voice suddenly called out to Colin. Of course, he did not respond because it was not him who had called out to him. Knight of Con. The other party called out to him again. Are you calling me? Colin turned around and saw a figure walking towards him. Of course. The person who had come was a young lady. However, the exquisite plate armor on her body, the silver sword on her waist, and the knight's boots on her feet all indicated her identity. She was a female knight. A valiant female knight. However, Colin did not recognize her. You must have mistaken me for someone else. My name is Colin. Really? The female knight showed a mysterious smile as she stood in front of Colin. The light fragrance of jasmine wafted into Colin's nose and he could not help but wonder. Was he really lucky today? Sure enough, the appearance of the Lord Reader was still too lethal to women. But in the next second, when the female knight announced her name, Colin's smug smile immediately froze on his face. My name is Cynthia. The female knight smiled deeply. Cynthia Pseudo. Chapter 32. What were the consequences of lying? Pinocchio's nose would grow longer. Vera's face would turn red. Marquis Charles, well, for a guy like Marquis Charles, lying was as easy as eating and drinking. Colin admitted that his acting skills might not be as good as Marquis Charles's, but when he lied, it was difficult for ordinary people to see the clues. However, this did not mean that there would be no consequences for lying. Now, the consequences were here. When he heard that the female knight's surname was Pseudo, Colin finally reacted. No wonder she called him Knight of Con. When Colin sneaked into the Firefox mercenaries to hide his identity, he used Con's Pseudo's alias. Now, the real Pseudo found the fake Pseudo. I think there might be some misunderstanding. Colin took half a step back, feeling a little guilty. What misunderstanding? Cynthia took a step forward and asked aggressively, My good brother, I haven't seen you for a few months and you have changed a lot. I almost didn't recognize you. Well, it turned out that this girl was Con Pseudo's sister. These days, the Black Cavalry went north and gathered a lot of scattered soldiers from the front line. The Pseudo family's Ice Stone City had long been occupied by the trolls, and the family army had long been defeated. So, it was not strange that Cynthia would appear here. What Colin found strange was how she knew that he had pretended to be her brother. There were only a few people who knew that he had used a fake identity, so someone must have told on him. For some reason, the first figure that appeared in Colin's mind was Sar. This filial son had always been at odds with him, and his thoughts were complicated and he liked to sow discord. So, Colin felt that it was very likely that this guy had instigated Cynthia to find trouble with him. Miss Cynthia, please listen to my explanation. Okay, go ahead. Actually, it's like this. Hey. Why did you draw your sword? Colin was scared and stepped back. Didn't you let me say it? Yes, you can say it, but I won't listen. Cynthia held her sword with both hands and assumed a charging posture. Mother said to never trust a man who has lied to you. What nonsense. Colin suspected that there was something wrong with this woman's head. Don't come over. This is a military camp, private fights are not allowed. For the sake of the Pseudo clan's reputation, I want to duel you. Draw your swords, cried Cynthia, throwing down a white glove. I don't accept it. Colin ignored the white gloves on the floor. He couldn't understand why this woman didn't even listen to his explanation and wanted to duel. Was there such a big grudge between them? Ha, coward. I will count to 3, and then we will attack. Cynthia obviously didn't care about the military rules that forbade personal fights. These things were actually used to restrain the lower-ranked soldiers. For the nobles, they were not very useful. 1. Cynthia's voice was as hard as iron. Cold sweat seeped out of Colin's forehead, and his right hand involuntarily gripped the hilt of his sword. He already understood that this woman would not listen to reason. Since she couldn't be reasoned with, he wasn't afraid of fighting. Colin had once faced the charge of nearly 1,000 wolf cavalry, and he was fearless in the front row. Now, it was just a woman, so of course, it couldn't scare him. Moreover, thanks to Archbishop Raven's holy water, Colin had already been promoted to a Tier 2 knight. At his age, Tier 2 was already quite a high standard. The crazy woman opposite him looked to be about the same age as him, so she shouldn't be more than this rank. 2. Cynthia counted again, her expression cold. Colin took a deep breath and pulled out the long sword at his waist. Then, he saw the female knight opposite him immediately turn into a golden bolt of lightning and charge towards him. Fuck. Didn't you say to count to 3? Bang. Colin only felt a huge impact. It was as if he had been hit by a tank, and his entire body flew backwards. Fuck. This crazy woman was probably a Tier 3 knight. The Lord of Light, illuminate the world. Cynthia still had time to chant a prayer. Coupled with the golden holy light emitted from her body, the scene was extremely Chinibu. However, Colin didn't have time to complain because the other party slashed at him again. Clang! Colin barely managed to block it, but the huge impact made his hands numb and he almost couldn't hold the sword. My heart is holy, cleanse the evil. Cynthia's pupils had already turned pure golden, without a trace of human emotion. She was as cold as a god. Bang! Colin was sent flying by a kick. This time, he flew further and directly smashed into a nearby tent. The soldiers in the tent ran out in a panic, only to see Cynthia emitting golden light. Then, they tacitly put away the swords in their hands and obediently hid at the side to watch the battle. The two knights were fighting, so the soldiers naturally didn't dare to meddle in other people's business. Pfft! Colin spat out a mouthful of blood. He felt that many of his ribs should have been broken, and the injuries that he had almost recovered from previously had relapsed. Woman! Don't go too far. Of course, this little threat would not be taken seriously by Cynthia. She still resolutely raised her sword and rushed over, fearless, unparalleled. The other party's unreasonable and arrogant attitude finally angered Colin completely. Ah! Colin let out a beast-like roar. In his memory, an indescribable anger and hatred surged out and instantly dominated his will. That was a will that did not belong to Colin, did not belong to his predecessor, and did not even belong to this world. It was as if it came from the ancient abyss, crossed tens of thousands of years of time and space, and suddenly descended. The moonlight flowed and shone behind Colin. There, vaguely.
It was as if a terrifying shadow had appeared. It was revealing its bloody fangs and spreading its huge black wings. Cynthia's golden eyes also appeared for a moment in shock. She thought that she was hallucinating, and her forward momentum was also interrupted. But soon, she calmed her mind again, firm and devout, slash through the thorns, /NM. Colin roared and instantly erupted with an unprecedented terrifying power. He stabbed out with his sword. With a clang. The armor on Cynthia's chest was actually pierced through, and the scattered iron pieces flew everywhere. Blood dyed her shirt red, and a few buttons on her chest were also broken, revealing some beautiful scenery. However, Cynthia seemed to be completely unaware, and she was not frightened by Colin's extraordinary performance just now. She calmly steadied her body and prayed again. Firm and devout, slash through the thorns. Then, she charged again. It was as if nothing could stop this woman. Colin, on the other hand, was somewhat lacking in stamina at this moment. Although the effect of the attack just now was terrifying, it actually allowed him to cross the gap of one level and suppress Cynthia. However, it also almost drained all his strength. Therefore, facing the crazy woman who charged at him again, Colin's eyes flashed with hostility. He made a decision. The long sword shone with a golden light and pierced toward Colin's chest like lightning. Colin didn't dodge at all. Chi! Cynthia looked at the long sword in her hand piercing through her opponent's chest, but her heart was filled with fear. Because Colin's sword. It was right at her throat.
Chapter 33. Let go. Colin's mouth was bleeding, but his tone was calm and unyielding. The golden light in Cynthia's eyes slowly faded, and her rationality slowly returned. So, facing this man with blood-red eyes, she was afraid. Madmen were always afraid of madmen who were even crazier. So, Cynthia let go of her sword. Colin didn't care about the long sword that pierced through his chest, as if it didn't exist. Who told you that I used your brother's name? Don't you need to treat your wound first? Don't talk nonsense. Colin used a bit of force, and the long sword drew a small wound on Cynthia's throat. Dark red blood flowed down slowly. I don't want to ask a second time. Madman. Cynthia cursed in her heart. In this world dominated by men, Cynthia, as a female knight, naturally had to bear more criticism and suspicion. So, she used her crazy appearance to cover herself with a thick layer of armor. Madwoman from the Sioux Duo family, the church's fanatic, bloodthirsty wild rose. Although these titles didn't sound good, they did make Cynthia untouchable in Ice Stone City. But now, looking at this man with a long sword in his chest and an extremely indifferent expression, Cynthia could only lower her arrogant head. Oliver. Hearing this name, Colin was stunned. It wasn't the filial son Sar. It was the fat merchant who had once hired Firefox mercenaries to escort the caravan to Fallen Eagle City. That guy actually didn't die in the Mirror Lake camp. He was really lucky. Where is he? As soon as Colin asked this question, he saw a fat figure in the crowd flashing, as if he was about to run away. Oliver. I see you. Get over here if you don't want to die. That fat figure looked as if he was struck by lightning, and instantly froze in place. After struggling for a while, he finally walked over dejectedly. Speak, how did you meet this crazy woman? And why did you betray me? Oliver shook his head repeatedly. I didn't betray. Speak. Colin said sternly. Oliver was so scared that the fat on his body trembled. Finally, he began to tell the truth. It turned out that when the Mirror Lake camp was attacked, Oliver had decisively jumped into the Mirror Lake to survive. He wasn't a good swimmer. However, he had a lot of fat on him. It was common knowledge that fat was less dense than water. Therefore, it was very easy for fat people to float on the water. Oliver floated in the lake for 3 days and 3 nights. Finally, when he was about to faint from hunger, he reached the shore. At this time, the Troll's main force had already left Mirror Lake. Therefore, Oliver managed to avoid a calamity. Then, he ran into another wave of deserters and ran south with them. Along the way, they met Cynthia, who was rushing over from Fallen Eagle City to provide support. When Cynthia heard that the Black Cavalry was heading north, she borrowed a few hundred men from her uncle, Count Oman, to provide support. Actually, after the death of Viscount Sioux Duo, his first successor, the guy that Colin had once impersonated, Khan Sioux Duo, should have led the army to retake Ice Stone City. This way, the Sioux Duo family would be able to regain their title and glory. However, not everyone could regain their confidence after a crushing defeat and once again step into the bloody and cruel battlefield. Knight of Khan was clearly a guy who was scared out of his wits. Therefore, he could only rely on his sister, Cynthia Sioux Duo, to lead the army. However, the Sioux Duo family's army had been defeated long ago. Count Oman obviously couldn't lend all his forces to the Sioux Duo family. Giving his niece a few hundred soldiers was already quite generous. Therefore, Cynthia, who was extremely short on troops, naturally wouldn't let Oliver's group of deserters go. She took them in without any explanation and forced them to continue fighting for the Sioux Duo family. Strictly speaking, her actions were illegal. However, the Sioux Duo family's territory was gone, so how could Cynthia care about this? Moreover, she was a crazy person in the first place. However, Oliver was in trouble. He had finally escaped from the Mirror Lake battlefield, but now he was being forced to do something beyond his ability. Already traumatized, he didn't want to be cannon fodder anymore. Therefore, Oliver found Cynthia and wanted to persuade her to let him go. He had some confidence in this. After all, he felt that he and the first successor of the Su duo family, Knight of Khan, were old acquaintances who had gone through trials and tribulations together. However, when Cynthia saw this merchant who claimed to have traveled with her brother to Fallen Eagle City, she immediately exposed him. The real Khan Su duo had fled to Fallen Eagle City with her, so how could he be related to a merchant group? Cynthia obviously felt that this was a lie. Poor Oliver was given a good thrashing, and then he behaved himself. However, after Cynthia led her army to meet up with the Black Cavalry, Oliver saw a glimmer of hope. This was because he saw an old acquaintance among the logisticians of the Black Cavalry, the filial son Sar. From Sar's words, Oliver finally understood why he was beaten up by Cynthia. This was because that Knight of Khan was actually a fake. Oliver felt aggrieved, but he didn't dare to say anything. After all, as a commoner, how could he report a noble? However, under the urging of Sar, who wanted the world to be in chaos, Oliver still confessed everything to Cynthia. He claimed that the one who lied was not him, but Colin. However, Cynthia wouldn't easily believe a commoner. In her opinion, the knight Colin was a noble, so why would he pretend to be her brother? The Su duo family was now on the verge of collapse, so what was the benefit of pretending to be their successor? In the face of Cynthia's questioning, Oliver panicked. He also couldn't understand why Colin would lie. In a moment of desperation, he suddenly remembered that he had promised Colin that he would help him build a bridge and use the Tulip Merchant Guild's financial resources to recruit soldiers for the Su duo family and retake Ice Stone City. At the time, Colin didn't agree. Of course, he didn't object either. Since he didn't object, then it was basically the same as agreeing. Therefore, Oliver decided to stick to the idea of sacrificing friends rather than oneself and told Cynthia that Colin had pretended to be the successor of the Su duo family in order to cheat the Tulip Merchant Guild of their financial support. This seemed to be the only reasonable explanation. Thus, Cynthia was furious. Someone actually dared to use the Su duo family's name to cheat outsiders. Now that the Su duo family had fallen to the point that they only had a name left, Cynthia naturally couldn't let this name be tarnished. After she had Oliver identify Colin from the camp, she took advantage of the fact that he was alone to come cause trouble. After listening to Oliver's explanation of the cause and effect of the matter, Colin felt a burst of anger in his heart. As expected, his guess wasn't wrong. It was Sar who had interfered in the matter. Colin glared fiercely at Cynthia. "I can tell you clearly that there was a reason for using your brother's name, and I have never used the Su duo family's name to scheme anything. Now that I have suffered a blow from you, let's call it a day." After saying this, Colin withdrew the long sword that was pressed against Cynthia's throat. Cynthia snorted coldly and turned around to leave. This crazy woman seemed to be very unconvinced. However, this matter was originally Colin's fault, so he couldn't do anything to Cynthia. However, Colin didn't plan to let Sar and Oliver off so easily. So, Colin turned to Oliver and ordered, "Go find Sar and bring him to see me. Tell him not to think about running away, otherwise he will have to bear the consequences." "Okay, but your injury?" Oliver looked at the long sword on Colin's chest and was secretly shocked. "I'm fine." As soon as Colin's voice fell, he heard Vera's anxious voice. "Colin. Colin, what's wrong with you?" It seemed that the commotion here had alarmed the female mage. At this time, Knight Colin, who was still as steady as Mount Tai, suddenly became shaky. He pressed his chest hard and screamed with a slightly exaggerated expression, "I can't, ah." Then he fell down. But the timing of his fall was quite coincidental, and he just fell into the arms of Vera, who was rushing over. When he felt the familiar soft touch, Colin spat out a mouthful of blood. "Quick! Go find Archbishop Raven, holy water." Vera had a tearful expression on her face, but the Archbishop has already used up the holy water last time. Colin. Chapter 34. The spring sun was shining brightly and there were no clouds in the sky. The little farce last night did not have much of an impact on the army. As soon as the sky brightened, the army set off as usual and continued to chase the traces of the trolls to the north. Of course, the word chase was not very appropriate. This was because the speed of the black cavalry was too slow. Colin always felt that Marquis Garcia seemed to be deliberately waiting for something. Moreover, at such a slow speed, the troll army had probably already retreated from the northern frontier. Perhaps, this was Marquis Garcia's plan. Win without a fight. Although he was full of doubts, Colin did not dare to question the supreme commander of the Black Cavalry. Moreover, here, and even in the entire northern frontier, no one dared to question Marquis Garcia's military orders. At the rear of the army, Colin once again lay down on the flatbed trailer that he had just left. In fact, his injury this time looked very scary, but it was not dangerous at all. Vera, on the other hand, was quite frightened. She once again looked for Archbishop Raven and asked him to personally cast a healing spell on Colin. The healing spell cast by the Archbishop was indeed very effective. After only one night, Colin could already feel that his wound was itching and showing signs of healing. However, he was not too happy. After all, what he wanted was not the healing spell, but the holy water. Unfortunately, the Archbishop had really run out of holy water. Sigh, it was a waste of a good show. It seemed that he would have to find a way to get some holy water from the church in the future. After all, compared to the blood of a high-ranking knight, pure holy water was relatively easier to obtain, although it was rare. Moreover, it was safe and stable without any risks. Just as Colin was lying on the trailer and began to have ideas about the church, Oliver quickly rushed over and reported, "Sir Colin, Sar he ran away." Colin glanced at the sweaty fatty, and a sinister look flashed across his face. If Sar really dared to run away, then Colin would definitely label him as a deserter so that he wouldn't be able to survive in the northern frontier. No, he didn't run. Could it be that he dares not to come? This time, Colin was a little surprised. A mere mercenary dared to disobey the orders of a noble? Just as Colin was about to order Raymond to slaughter that filial son, he heard Oliver shake his head. No, Sar has already joined the Sioux Duo family's team. And when I asked Knight Cynthia for the person, she. What did she say? Colin's voice was cold. Oliver shrank back and whispered, "She said, you don't have the right to order the people of the Sioux Duo clan, he." Colin's face turned green. This filial son could see the situation clearly. He actually managed to latch onto another thick thigh so quickly. And that crazy woman from the Sioux Duo clan, it looked like she really planned to fight Colin to the end. Taking a deep breath, Colin calmed himself down. He felt that he didn't need to be anxious. The Sioux Duo clan that had lost their fief was just yesterday's flower. How long could that crazy woman protect Sar? Sooner or later, Colin would send that filial son to hell to reunite with his father. But this time, Colin seemed to have miscalculated. Because in just a few days, Ice Stone City was reclaimed by the Sioux Duo clan. Moreover, the entire reclaiming process was unbelievably simple. When the Black Guards slowly made their way north, they discovered that not only did they not encounter any troll armies along the way, the trolls had even completely abandoned the cities that they had once occupied. Yes, completely abandoned. The troll soldiers had all left, as if they had never been there. And so, the fleeing lords and nobles that Black Cavalry had gathered along the way were instantly energized. They led their defeated soldiers and killed their way back into the empty cities, announcing that they had reclaimed their lost territories. Because Black Cavalry was maintaining order. There was no fighting over territory. The lords all tacitly only led their armies into their original fiefs and didn't steal anyone else's cities. There were even a few clans whose heirs had all died, and no one dared to take over their territories. After all, the victory this time was completely built on Black Cavalry's reputation. The other lords were just following behind black cavalry to take advantage of the situation. If they still didn't know what was good for them and took over something that didn't belong to them, then Marquis Garcia wouldn't be polite to them. In the eyes of the lords, those ownerless fiefs naturally had to be handed over to Marquis Garcia to deal with. So, no matter how much Colin gritted his teeth and cursed the Sioux Duo clan's bullshit luck, Cynthia had reclaimed Ice Stone City without shedding a drop of blood. The revival of the Sioux Duo clan seemed to be in sight. Afterwards, Black Cavalry set up camp on the outskirts of Ice Stone City. Ice Stone City was the largest city closest to the Sky Ice Plains in the northeastern region of the northern frontier. Marquis Garcia seemed to be preparing to stay here for a long time and didn't have any intentions of continuing north to attack the trolls. Cynthia, who had reclaimed Ice Stone City, was feeling proud of her success. She immediately invited Marquis Garcia and the other nobles into Ice Stone City and announced that a banquet would be held 3 days later to celebrate this great victory. Colin also received an invitation to the banquet, but he felt that the crazy woman didn't have any intentions of letting bygones be bygones. Although it couldn't be considered a banquet at Hong Men, Colin felt that Cynthia definitely wouldn't let him have an easy time at the banquet. Of course, Colin wouldn't be scared. He really wanted to see what kind of program that crazy woman had arranged for him. He hoped that it wouldn't disappoint him. Oliver. Colin put down the banquet invitation in his hand and called out. Sir, what orders do you have? For the past few days, Oliver had been ordered around by Colin like a servant. It could be considered his punishment for revealing Colin's secret of using a fake identity. I need a set of formal attire for the banquet. Do you know which tailor shop in Ice Stone City can make it? Colin had snuck out this time by hiding his identity, so he naturally wouldn't bring something like formal attire with him. Hearing this, Oliver hurriedly put on a flattering smile. Sir Colin, our Tulip Merchant Guild has a branch in Ice Stone City. There are definitely excellent tailors there who can make a beautiful formal attire for you. Colin looked at Oliver with a smile that wasn't a smile, but didn't say anything. Until the fat merchant felt his hair stand on end and sweat appeared on his forehead. All right, then let's go to the place you mentioned. Yes. Oliver let out a long sigh of relief. Ever since he saw the viciousness Colin displayed in his battle with Cynthia that night, Oliver was especially afraid of this heir to the title of Baron. Even though Oliver had faced other nobles with higher titles before, no one had been able to give him such a strong sense of oppression. When Colin didn't immediately agree to Oliver's suggestion, he immediately realized that he had said the wrong thing. That was because the Tulip Merchant Guild was Oliver's territory. When he suggested going there to find a tailor, it was obvious that he wanted to take the opportunity to break away from Colin's control. However, Colin had agreed. This made Oliver even more anxious. The banquet was in 3 days. Time was tight, so the two didn't delay and immediately went to the Tulip Merchant Guild's branch that Oliver had mentioned. I heard that all the slightly famous tailors in the city have been recruited. Many of the adults who attended the banquet this time didn't seem to have brought their formal attire because they were in a hurry. That's why the Sioux Duo family is preparing to rush it. True enough. This time, Colin was finally convinced that the crazy woman most likely wanted him to make a fool of himself over the issue of his formal attire. Seeing that Colin was silent, the freckled girl kindly suggested, Sir, if you need to make a formal attire, Mr. Jack's apprentice is still in the shop. He may be able to help you, apprentice. Before Colin could speak, Oliver scolded loudly, Let that clumsy guy make a formal attire for a noble? Are you out of your mind? The freckled girl shrank her head and didn't dare to speak. Colin wouldn't feel at ease leaving the production of formal attire to a tailor's apprentice. Of course, he wouldn't go to the Sioux Duo family's castle to beg that crazy woman. So, how could he find a suitable formal attire in such a short time? Colin rubbed his chin. After thinking for a while, he suddenly asked, Do you sell armor in your shop? Of course. Oliver hurriedly said loudly, Please come with me, Colin followed Oliver to a room. At a glance, there were all kinds of armors. "Sir, these are the finest items collected by our Chamber of Commerce. There are plate armors, chain armors, and even enchanted armors." "There are enchanted armors?" Colin was suddenly interested. The so-called enchantment was the method of carving a magic circle on the surface of the armor and asking a mage to enchant the magic circle so that the armor would have various arcane characteristics. This wasn't a simple matter. First of all, to carve the complex magic circle on the armor required an extremely high level of forging skills. Secondly, the price of enchantment by a mage was also extremely expensive. Therefore, an enchanted armor could often be sold at a sky-high price. The armor that Colin had left in the Kingdom of Grey Castle was not enchanted. The only set of enchanted armor in the Angeli family was of course worn by his father. Unfortunately, that set of enchanted armor had died in battle with his father and should have become the troll's spoils of war. Therefore, Colin excitedly followed Oliver's lead and came to the only set of enchanted armor in the room. This was a set of pure white armor, carved with beautiful and mysterious lines that emitted a faint icy aura. This set of armor is enchanted with the rank 4 magic circle, Frost Blessing. When attacked, it can explode with frost and cause damage to the attacker. Oliver explained at the side. A rank 4 magic circle. Colin remembered that the set of enchanted armor passed down in the Angeli family only had a rank 2 magic circle carved on it. How much is this set of enchanted armor? Colin was tempted. Oliver turned back and muttered to an old blacksmith for a moment before giving a sky-high price, 50,000 gold coins. How much? Colin had a face of disbelief. One had to know that the entire Angeli family's annual tax revenue was only 3,000 gold coins. In other words, even if the Angeli family did not eat or drink for 10 years, they would still not be able to afford this set of armor. It was no wonder that the rank 2 enchanted armor of the Angeli family was treated as a family heirloom. Colin reluctantly looked at the set of enchanted armor, then decisively turned around. This was not something he could afford. Even if he sold everything he had, he would not be able to afford to maintain it. How about this set? Colin asked as he changed into another set of armor without enchantments. This set is 2,000 gold coins. Colin took a deep breath, feeling a little pained. However, he also knew that this kind of exquisite armor would not be cheap. "Can I pay a deposit first? I will inform Grey Castle to send the rest of the money." Hearing this, Oliver thought for a moment before gritting his teeth and saying, "Sir Colin, if you like this set of armor, I can give it to you for free." For free? Colin smiled playfully. He did not believe that there were free things in this world. Everything had a price, it was just that some prices did not appear in the form of money. "That's right," Oliver said in a deep voice, "I previously accidentally destroyed your relationship with the Su Duo family and caused you to be injured. Therefore, this set of armor is my apology to you." Sure enough, after returning to the Tulip Chamber of Commerce, this fatty began to think of ways to get out of Colin's control. This set of free armor was actually Oliver's redemption fee. Good. I'll accept your apology. Seeing that Oliver's apology was sincere, Colin decided not to pursue the previous matter. Then, he found a pen and paper and drew a roaring bear head with some thorny patterns on the back of the eagle shield emblem. "Help me engrave the Angeli family's emblem and send it to my residence within 3 days." Okay. After finishing his instructions, Colin was ready to get up and leave. "Sir Colin, about the dress for the banquet," Oliver kindly reminded him. "I already have a way to deal with the dress, you don't have to worry about it." Colin turned around and revealed an unfathomable smile. Yes, Colin couldn't find any formal attire, so he simply wore the armor that he had just bought. Logically speaking, this was indeed quite rude. However, Colin was already prepared. He calmly asked, "Then what should I wear?" "Of course you should wear formal attire." The butler looked at her as if she was looking at a fool. He even began to use his eyes to signal the guards next to him, preparing to chase this rude knight out of the castle. Formal attire. Colin sneered. Suddenly, he smashed his fist on his breastplate and shouted, "The Northern Territory has just suffered a great humiliation. The troll army has just retreated, and they're returning unscathed with a bountiful harvest. You all still have the mood to dress up and sing and dance. What about our counterattack? What about our revenge? What about our courage? Why didn't we do anything? I'm just a small knight, I don't have the right to question your decisions. But I feel sorry for my father, Baron Angeli, who died in the front lines. As his only son, I swear that I won't take off my armor if I don't take revenge." The whole hall was silent. Colin's righteous words seemed to have pressed the pause button on the scene. Everyone stared at this strange person who came to the banquet in armor, dumbfounded. Especially the old butler of the Sioux Duo family. Until now, his brain was still buzzing. He didn't know if he was shocked by Colin's loud voice, or shocked by what he said. At this time, he also knew that he couldn't chase this rude knight out of the castle according to his original plan. Colin was indeed rude, but he had the moral high ground. Strictly speaking, this banquet did have the taste of whitewashing the peace. But this wasn't because the previous defeat was too sudden, and the giant demon army's retreat was too unexpected. So, those lords and nobles who easily recovered their lost land, urgently needed a chance to cover up their previous failures and announce their current victory. So, this banquet to celebrate the victory was promoted by all parties. But they didn't expect that now, someone would stand up and ruthlessly tear this false mask of victory, and smash it heavily on the faces of the nobles. Cynthia Sioux Duo was also in the crowd. She wanted to see the ugly state of Colin, this annoying guy, being chased out of the castle, but she didn't expect that she would see this scene. Cynthia almost clenched her silver teeth, but at the same time, a trace of regret appeared in her heart. This banquet was originally an excellent opportunity for the Sioux Duo family to become famous, but now, it seemed to have become a joke. It was all because of one person. A person who was originally insignificant. A person she wanted to humiliate with some small tricks. Perhaps, she shouldn't have done so. Colin didn't know that the crazy woman Cynthia was also watching him, and he still had that awe-inspiring righteousness. He ignored the gazes from the surroundings and strode forward as if no one was around. Bang! The old butler, who was still in a daze, was knocked down by Colin. But he didn't dare to stop him. He watched as Colin, wearing the pure white armor, walked into the banquet hall. Many nobles who were attending the banquet had already gathered in the hall. When they saw Colin's figure walking into the hall, everyone had different expressions, whispering to each other, and discussing. Obviously, Colin's loud voice had already spread those bold words into the banquet hall. So, he naturally became the temporary focus of the banquet. However, no one came forward to greet him. Obviously, Colin was isolated. But he didn't care at all. His heart was even filled with joy. After all, this was the banquet that crazy woman had tried every means to plan. She wanted to make a name for the Sioux Duo family, but now, it seemed to have been completely destroyed by Colin's words. There was still some time before the banquet officially began. Therefore, the nobles attending the banquet were still arriving one after another. The newcomers clearly felt that the atmosphere in the hall seemed to be a little wrong. After asking around, they found out that it was Colin's doing. Therefore, more and more gazes were cast at Colin. Colin also felt a little annoyed and simply closed his eyes. As time passed, the status of the newcomers became higher and higher. Until Marquis Charles appeared at the entrance of the hall. Then, the banquet suddenly fell silent again. This wasn't because Marquis Charles had a high prestige among the nobles. On the contrary, due to the series of previous defeats, his reputation among the nobles of the northern frontier was very bad. But his appearance still made the entire hall fall silent again. because he was also wearing a suit of armor. A calm voice came from the entrance of the hall. The voice was not loud, but it made the entire hall quiet down. Moreover, this person's words revealed his disdain for Marquis Charles. However, no one present dared to refute him. Even Marquis Charles himself, although his carefully prepared performance was abruptly interrupted, he only showed an awkward and guilty expression when he heard the words. At the same time, the crowd immediately separated to both sides, making a spacious passage for the person at the door. Marquis Garcia appeared at the door. Vera, who was dressed up, followed behind him. The two armored men finally stopped looking at each other emotionally. They turned around and bowed to the two who walked into the hall at this time. Marquis Garcia was wearing a dark blue suit today. He had a cold expression on his face as he walked quickly through the crowd. When he passed by Colin and Marquis Charles, he did not stop. He did not even look at the two of them. It was as if he did not care about the farce caused by the two of them. As the person with the highest status in today's banquet, Marquis Garcia's attitude was very important. When they saw that he did not pay attention to the two armored men, all the nobles who attended the banquet breathed a sigh of relief. However, although Marquis Garcia was worthy of being the focus of today's banquet, the real focus of the banquet was someone else. At least, all the men at the banquet were looking at the slender and graceful figure behind Marquis Garcia. Of course, Colin was no exception. Vera was breathtakingly beautiful tonight. She was wearing a pure white dress with a slit. Her dazzling blonde hair was draped over her smooth shoulders, and her blue eyes were as pure as the sea. Her height of 1.7 meters was extremely proportionate, and the tight-fitting dress highlighted every part of her body, weaving into mesmerizing curves. What made the male nobles at the banquet even more irresistible was that Vera had an almost perfect and delicate face. Moreover, the mystery of a mage, the dignity and elegance of a great noble, and the gentleness and grace of a young girl were perfectly combined on her body, exuding a fatal attraction. Who is she? Many of the male nobles had already begun to inquire about Vera's identity in a low voice. The adopted daughter of the Duke of St. Hilda was indeed very mysterious. Colin could not find any information about her in the memory of his predecessor. It was as if the Duke of St. Hilda was deliberately covering up her existence. However, Marquis Garcia seemed to be officially introducing this beauty to the people of the northern frontier today. Before the banquet begins, please allow me to formally introduce this beautiful lady next to me. Marquis Garcia led Vera to the high platform in the front row of the hall and introduced her. Vera St. Hilda, the adopted daughter of the Duke of St. Hilda. Wow! After hearing Vera's true identity, the eyes of the male nobles under the stage became even more blazing. There was only one thought left in their minds: to marry her. One must always have a dream. Otherwise, what was the difference between them and a salted fish? Marquis Garcia seemed to have seen through the thoughts of the crowd. Therefore, he did not delay any longer. He immediately picked up a wine glass and said loudly, "Tonight's banquet officially begins. Everyone, enjoy yourselves. Praise the Marquis." As soon as Marquis Garcia's voice fell, beautiful music began to play. The banquet officially began. As expected, Miss Vera was immediately surrounded by many male nobles of the right age. Regardless of their status, almost all of the unmarried men present wanted to have a try to see if they had a chance to win the heart of the beauty. After all, a woman like Vera, whose appearance and status could be said to be the best choice, was the best marriage partner. As for whether it was a good idea or not, they would have to give it a try first. Vera skillfully dealt with the nobles who came to talk to her, as if such a scene was nothing to her. Her every move revealed the temperament of the Duke's daughter, and she politely and firmly rejected the men who came to her. "Aren't you going to give it a try?" Marquis Charles nudged Colin, who was next to him, with his elbow. "Of course," Colin said with a calm look on his face. But I have to give others a chance to try first. Marquis Charles could hear the strong confidence in Colin's words, and he was a little surprised. Hey! Don't blame me for not reminding you. There are many young men at the banquet today who are better than you in terms of status and appearance. Colin shrugged his shoulders and ignored Charles's warning. Instead, he picked up a glass of champagne from the tray of a passing waiter and tasted it carefully. When Marquis Charles saw this, he rolled his eyes and felt that he had been worrying for nothing. At this time, there were already many couples dancing in the center of the banquet hall. However, Vera had not accepted any invitation from any of the men yet. Finally, after waiting for the people around her to leave one by one, Colin put down his glass of champagne and walked towards Vera. "Beautiful and noble lady, may I have the honor of dancing with you?" Colin bowed slightly and stretched out his right hand towards Vera. Vera's face was slightly flushed, and she obediently placed her right hand in Colin's hand. "Okay." Chapter 38. Accompanied by the melodious music, pairs of men and women danced on the dance floor of the banquet hall. They were dancing the most traditional palace dance of the Empire of Light. It was similar to the Vienna waltz on Earth. The male and female dance partners needed to borrow each other's strength to complete a series of reverses, swings, and spins in a harmonious manner at a very fast speed. The entire dance was light, smooth, and elegant. In such a fast rotation, everything around them would become blurred, and only the face of the dance partner in their arms could be seen clearly. Spin, spin, and spin again. It was as if they were going to dance together until the end of time. However, the music would eventually come to an end. The song was over. Colin completed the last rotation with Vera, who was as light as a feather. Then, he reluctantly withdrew his right hand from Vera's smooth back, stepped back slightly, and bowed. "Thank you, Miss Vera. This is the most unforgettable dance I have ever danced." Vera's small face was still red, and she was panting slightly. It seemed that she had not recovered from the dance just now. When she heard Colin's flattery, she smiled slyly. "Knight Colin, why do I feel that you have said this to many girls?" Colin raised his head and did not panic at all. He knew very well that at this time, what he should do was not to defend himself, but to attack. So, he smiled and said, "Please believe me, from now on, I will only say such words to you." Sure enough, Colin's slightly straightforward words made Vera feel a little overwhelmed. Sweet words. Vera snorted and rolled her eyes at Colin, but there was an embarrassed smile on her face. At this moment, Colin could already feel the gazes filled with killing intent all around him. Obviously, after successfully becoming Vera's first dance partner, Colin had naturally become the public enemy of all the male nobles present. However, he obviously did not care. He was determined to hug this thick thigh of Vera's. Because he had already seen Earl Amon's figure in the crowd. The fear of being assassinated instantly shrouded Colin's heart, and he had no choice but to think of ways to raise his value so that the other party would be wary of him. After sending Vera back to Marquis Garcia's side, Colin politely said goodbye. He knew that going too far was as bad as falling short. Therefore, it would be foolish for him to continue pestering Vera at this time. But before he could walk far, a young man blocked in front of Colin. Huh? Was the supporting character that was sent to be slapped in the face already appearing so quickly? Colin smiled politely while letting his imagination run wild. "May I ask who you are?" The young man smiled coldly. "Knight Colin, I heard that you used my identity." "Why? Don't tell me you can't recognize me." Colin paused for a moment and immediately realized who the person in front of him was. No wonder she looked familiar. She looked just as annoying as that crazy woman. They were indeed siblings. "So it's Knight Consudo. It's an honor to meet you," Colin said, but there was no respect in his eyes. Con was obviously very unhappy with Colin, and he said sarcastically, Knight Colin, if the Honorable Miss Vera knew that the knight she was dancing with just now was actually a liar, how would she react? Faced with Khan's threat, Colin shrugged as if he did not care at all. Why don't you try and find out? Khan's face suddenly sank, as if he could not tell whether Colin was really fearless or just pretending. But before he could continue to probe, Colin suddenly lowered his voice and said, "However, if I were you, I would first care about your good sister." "What happened to my sister?" Seeing that the other party had taken the bait, Colin smiled and said, "You should know that the one who really led the army to reclaim Ice Stone City was your sister, Knight Cynthia. So, according to the rules of the feudal lord, shouldn't she be the one to inherit the title of Duke of the Pseudo family and not you?" "Nonsense." Khan was like a kitten whose tail had been stepped on, and he suddenly exploded, "I am the first in line to inherit the Pseudo family. You should save this kind of words for the Duke of St. Hilda." Colin spread his hands, indicating that this matter had nothing to do with him. Khan almost could not control his anger when he saw this annoying look, and he stared fiercely at Colin, breathing heavily. It was as if he wanted to beat up this abominable person in front of him. But soon, Khan calmed down. Because a palm pressed on his shoulder. Khan turned around, and his expression immediately became respectful. "Uncle." Colin's pupils shrank as he looked at the person who had come, Count Aldman. "Lord Count." Colin carefully lowered his head, not wanting the other party to see the fear hidden in his eyes. Count Aldman was a mature and elegant middle-aged man. He always had a faint smile on his face, as if he was courteous to everyone. However, from time to time, his wine-red eyes would reveal a trace of hidden coldness, indicating that this count was not a kind and nice person. "Colin, I'm so happy to see that you're fine." Count Aldman patted Colin's shoulder lightly, his face brimming with a smile from the bottom of his heart. "I heard that you were assassinated in Greycastle. What exactly happened? Who was so daring?" Colin raised his head, his face already wearing a friendly smile. "The assassin was Knight Carter. As for who ordered him to do it, it's still under investigation." "Carter?" Count Aldman snorted and said angrily, "That ungrateful wretch is a disgrace to the world of knights. Don't worry, I will send someone to investigate this matter. If there is any news, I will definitely inform you." "Thank you very much for your help, Lord Count." Colin looked at the righteous count in front of him and suddenly felt that this person's acting skills were not inferior to Marquis Charles's. Count Aldman chuckled and said a few words of concern to Colin, as if he was really a friendly elder. Colin also dealt with him carefully, as if he had never suspected that his assassination had anything to do with this count in front of him. Before leaving, Count Aldman lowered his voice and asked, "Did you and Marquis Charles discuss wearing armor to attend the banquet together?" "No, we just happened to think of the same thing." Colin found it strange that the other party would suddenly ask this. Count Aldman said meaningfully, "Oh, that's good then. But you have to be careful. Don't get too close to Marquis Charles." "Why?" Colin asked directly. Count Aldman did not answer, but the Knight of Khan beside him mocked arrogantly. "Idiot. Marquis Charles lost so miserably this time, and lost 200,000 northern frontier troops. Does he not have to take responsibility for this? You actually dare to get close." "Shut up." Count Aldman growled. The Knight of Khan immediately shrank back, turning into a quail again. Count Aldman turned his head and said to Colin, "Remember, our loyalty will always be to the Duke of St. Hilda, not to some marquis." Looking at Count Aldman's departing figure, Colin suddenly narrowed his eyes. Only then did he realize that tonight's banquet seemed to be brewing a dangerous undercurrent. Chapter 39. People were divided into different classes. The nobles were no exception. There were big nobles, small nobles, and knights who were nobles but not completely nobles. This banquet of the Su Duo family was divided into such a clear hierarchy. Marquis Garcia, Marquis Charles, and Vera. These three were the core circle of the banquet. Countless people tried their best to get close to them, but they only dared to greet them for a short while. They did not dare to stay for long. Otherwise, they would be considered rude and overestimating themselves. Outside the core circle, there was a circle led by Earl Almond. There were 3 earls gathered here, as well as the host of the banquet, the Sue Duo family. Further out were a group of viscounts and barons. The last circle, which was also the most numerous, was the knights, including Colin. In fact, strictly speaking, Colin was also qualified to go to the circle of barons. However, he had now realized that this banquet was not as simple as it seemed on the surface, so he began to deliberately reduce his presence. He was prepared to be a qualified bystander. Although Colin and Marquis Charles seemed to appreciate each other before, if the Marquis was really unable to protect himself, then Colin would never let himself be dragged into the water in order to help him. If it was Vera, then Colin might consider how to save the damsel in distress. But Marquis Charles, who liked to pull people, cry, and act, good luck, the banquet was still going on, but the atmosphere seemed to have quietly changed. The music was still going on, but the center of the dance floor was already empty. Even though he was in the outermost circle of the banquet, Colin had already felt that the atmosphere around him had begun to become heavy. With his enhanced hearing at night, Colin eavesdropped on the discussions of the knights around him. He did not know when it started, but everyone had stopped talking about this lucky victory and turned the topic to their own losses. Indeed, the series of defeats commanded by Marquis Charles had almost destroyed 200,000 troops on the northern frontier. Of these, half of them were under the direct command of the House of St. Hilda, but the other half were the private armies of the various feudal lords of the northern frontier. In addition, the territories near the front lines had been conquered by the trolls. Even if they had reclaimed them now, the trolls would not return empty-handed. Therefore, this time, the lords of the northern frontier suffered heavy losses. Someone had to take responsibility for such a heavy loss. Thus, the topic gradually became unfavorable to Marquis Charles. Of course, the House of St. Hilda still had its prestige, so no one dared to rebuke the House of St. Hilda directly. They could only make a few indirect complaints. In Colin's opinion, such complaints wouldn't hurt Marquis Charles's foundation at all. At most, it would make his reputation a little worse. Perhaps it would make the House of St. Hilda feel guilty for this crushing defeat. Perhaps they would compensate the lords a little later, but that was all. If Count Almond hadn't been bluffing earlier, this little action shouldn't have been the main dish of this banquet. Thus, Colin continued to wait. As expected, Colin waited for a truly explosive piece of news. Did you hear? This time, Marquis Garcia led the Black Cavalry to reinforce the front lines without the Duke's orders. What do you mean? Are you saying Marquis Garcia sent his troops on his own? That's right. That's why the Marquis stopped in Ice Stone City. He's waiting for the Duke's orders. Ha! He already sent his troops on his own, why is he still waiting for orders? Shoo! Why are you being so loud? Are you looking for death? Colin was speechless. These people seemed to be whispering, but they didn't try to hide it at all. Moreover, he had already discovered that this rumor had spread throughout the banquet. At this moment, he suddenly realized what was going on with this hidden undercurrent. Without a doubt, Marquis Charles was still the true target of these people. However, he was still the Duke's eldest son, and the House of St. Hilda's prestige was unparalleled in the northern frontier. The lords and nobles who had suffered heavy losses could only be angry at Marquis Charles, but they didn't dare to say anything. However, if someone was leading them, then it would be different. This person had already made his position clear. The first time he saw Marquis Charles after his troops had been defeated, he had whipped him in public. Before tonight's banquet began, he had once again interrupted a carefully planned performance by Marquis Charles. This he was naturally the commander of the Black Cavalry, the number 1 person in the Northern Frontier Army, the Duke's younger brother, Marquis Garcia. Only when Marquis Garcia clearly expressed his dislike for Marquis Charles did the other nobles dare to complain behind him. However, at first, they only stopped at complaining. However, when everyone knew that Marquis Garcia had secretly mobilized the Black Cavalry without the Duke's orders, the situation changed. Although the Black Cavalry was Marquis Garcia's private army, in name, of course, they were under the Marquis command. However, this was the northern frontier after all. The Duke of St. Hilda was the real owner here. Moreover, the Black Cavalry had already left the Marquis territory. Shouldn't they have gotten the Duke's approval first? Therefore, for some reason, this rumor that had spread throughout the banquet vaguely revealed a signal. It was a dangerous signal. Marquis Garcia and the Duke of St. Hilda were not on good terms. In fact, a smart person would have noticed the Duke of St. Hilda's fear of his own brother when he hid the Black Cavalry 3 years ago. However, at that time, Marquis Garcia did not disobey his brother's orders. But now, could it be that after the crushing defeat of Marquis Charles, Marquis Garcia was finally dissatisfied with his brother's nepotism and started to take the initiative to rebel? After all, the Black Cavalry was an extremely terrifying army. Although there were only 50,000 people, no one doubted that in the hands of Marquis Garcia, they could not sweep the northern frontier. Moreover, due to the crushing defeats of Marquis Charles, the military strength of the northern frontier had been severely weakened. In this way, the Black Cavalry seemed even more terrifying. That was why this piece of gossip had such a terrifying effect. Marquis Garcia had repeatedly humiliated Marquis Charles. Did he really want to teach the younger generation a lesson, or did he want to take the opportunity to express his dissatisfaction with the Duke of St. Hilda? He then thought of Earl Amon's hint and the current turbulent undercurrent in the banquet. Colin suddenly realized that a terrifying storm was brewing. Once it took shape, it would have the terrifying power to sweep through the entire northern frontier. Just as the atmosphere in the banquet was becoming more and more serious, Knight Khan Sudo suddenly appeared in front of Marquis Charles. He first bowed respectfully, then raised his head and asked in a righteous tone, "What's the matter?" "Sir Marquis, I would like to ask, for the crushing defeat of the northern frontier this time, should someone take responsibility for it?" Marquis Charles was stunned. Marquis Garcia was expressionless. The entire banquet was silent. The storm had officially arrived. Chapter 40. Khan Su Duo felt a little smug as he enjoyed the attention of everyone. Especially Miss Vera's clear gaze. Khan was so excited that his face turned red and his whole body trembled. The heir of the Su Duo family suddenly felt that if he went to ask Miss Vera for a dance now, he might not be rejected like before. He felt that he was a hero now. However, Colin looked at him as if he was looking at an idiot. He did not expect that this guy would be the one to stand up for him. All the nobles present were excited when they saw the Knight of Khan questioning Marquis Charles. Except for one person. This person was Khan's sister, Cynthia Su Duo, the crazy woman Colin called Cynthia Su Duo. She looked at her brother with eyes full of horror. Why? Why did this banquet, which was supposed to make the Su Duo family famous, become like this? If possible, she just wanted to seal her brother's mouth and lock him in the basement, never letting him out. Cynthia knew very well that Marquis Charles might have really angered everyone, but he was still the first heir of the House of St. Hilda. Her brother was just the heir of the Viscounts, so what right did he have to question him? No, although her brother was stupid, he was definitely not someone who had the guts to do so. Otherwise, when Cynthia led her army to reclaim Icestone City, he would not have continued to hide in Fallen Eagle City. Thinking of this, she suddenly turned to look at Earl Aldman. It seemed that this good uncle had whispered something in her brother's ear, causing Khan to rush forward. Cynthia felt a chill in her heart. She suddenly felt that the future of the Su Duo family seemed to be bleak. Knight of Khan, you are right. Marquis Charles did not care about the other party's offense at all. He took a deep breath and asked sincerely, "Then, what kind of punishment do you think can make up for my previous mistakes?" Khan did not expect Marquis Charles to be so easy to talk to. At this time, when he saw the dignified Marquis waiting for his judgment so humbly, Khan trembled even more. However, after the excitement, Khan also felt a little lost. He opened his mouth but did not dare to say what punishment was suitable for Marquis Charles. Quietly turning his head, Khan looked at his uncle, Earl Yuman, with a pleading gaze. But Count Almond's head was lowered, as though he had no idea what was going on. Khan's heart sank. However, just as he was about to retreat, he suddenly saw Vera staring at him. In Khan's eyes, it was a gaze filled with encouragement, admiration, and even admiration. Thus, the Knight of Khan was once again filled with power. Even the pimple on his nose was faintly glowing red. For a moment, he felt that he was super brave. "My title." Khan's sharp voice echoed in the hall. "As punishment, you should voluntarily give up your Marquis title." Whoosh, everyone was stunned. Even Marquis Charles, who had always been outstanding in acting, did not know how to react. Colin looked at Khan with eyes full of pity. This was a look of concern for the mentally retarded. At this time, Cynthia's face was full of despair. She did not know whether the title of Marquis Charles could be kept, but it seemed that the title of Viscounts of the Sue Duo family would be lost. The title of Marquis Charles was a fake, and it represented his qualifications as the first successor of the Duke of St. Hilda. It also represented the face of the Duke of St. Hilda. Asking Marquis Charles to give up his title was no longer a punishment for Charles, but a slap in the face of the Duke of St. Hilda. It was forcing the Lord of the Northern Frontier to admit his mistake. It was forcing him to abdicate. The music finally stopped. The atmosphere in the banquet hall was so stagnant that it was almost suffocating. The eyes of the audience were focused on Marquis Charles and the Knight of Khan. The Knight of Khan originally enjoyed the feeling of being the focus of the audience, but now, he felt uneasy. Cold sweat dripped down from his forehead. Khan once again looked for the gaze of the goddess in his heart, Vera. But Vera was no longer looking at him at this time. Instead, she was looking at her brother, Marquis Charles, with a worried look. Khan's face instantly turned pale, as if he finally realized what a stupid thing he had done. Marquis Charles's face was also very ugly at this time. He also did not know how to deal with it. He could not agree to give up his title, and he did not dare to agree to it. This was no longer a matter of his honor and disgrace alone. It involved his father's face, and even the prestige of the House of St. Hilda. Since when did the Lord of the Northern Region allow a bunch of inferior nobles to tell him what to do when it came to his successor? Marquis Charles did not look at the uneasy Khan again. This idiot was just a gun that was pushed out. He looked past Khan and slowly swept across the audience. But he did not see any friendly and supportive eyes. At this time, he gradually realized that this storm was probably premeditated. It was not only against him, but also against his father. Then all the more he couldn't back down. If he took a step back, he would be smashed to pieces. So, Marquis Charles took a few steps forward, walked past Khan, and faced the nobles in the hall. With a serious expression, he said, "Anyone else who thinks that I should give up my title, please stand up." He did not want to pay attention to Khan, who was just a puppet. Instead, he wanted to force the real mastermind behind the scenes to come out. Moreover, he did not believe that the House of St. Hilda, which had ruled the northern frontier for thousands of years, would be in danger of falling apart immediately after a fiasco. The audience was silent. The House of St. Hilda had been in power for thousands of years, and it was not a simple matter in the northern frontier. So, the banquet became awkward again. After a long time, a voice finally broke the silence. "Oh, I'm sorry, Marquis Charles. Khan is still young and insensible. If his words offended you, I hope that you can forgive him." The one who stood up was Earl Oman. However, he did not continue to target Marquis Charles. Instead, he excused Khan. He also gave Marquis Charles a way out. Colin suddenly had some doubts. Could it be that Earl Amon was really loyal to the Duke of St. Hilda and did not participate in this conspiracy against Marquis Charles? But very quickly, Earl Amon's next sentence dispelled Colin's previous thoughts. Marquis Garcia, what punishment do you think is suitable for Marquis Charles's previous mistakes? When Marquis Garcia heard this, he seemed to have woken up from his relaxed state of being a bystander. Under everyone's gaze, he slowly stood up and walked to the front of the stage, standing side by side with Marquis Charles. Marquis Charles could only bow slightly, take half a step back, and give up the center position. Facing the Knight of Khan, Earl Amon, or any of the nobles present, Marquis Charles would not back down. However, Marquis Garcia was an exception. Because this commander of the Black Cavalry really had the ability to flip the table. Marquis Charles was not sure whether his uncle wanted to flip the table or not. Was all of this caused by the nobles of the northern frontier who were dissatisfied with him, or was it secretly planned by Marquis Garcia? If it was the former, Charles was not too worried. If it was the latter, Charles. Marquis Garcia finally spoke. Uncle. Marquis Charles lowered his head slightly, waiting for the trial with a heart full of anxiety. 200,000 northern frontier soldiers, what are you going to use to atone for your crimes? Kaboom! Marquis Charles felt as if he was struck by lightning. He was stunned on the spot. What else could he use to atone for his crimes? Marquis Charles raised his head in shock, looking at his uncle with a face full of shock. It was as if he was truly seeing him for the first time. Colin watched this scene from afar, and a word flashed in his mind, the dagger was revealed. Chapter 41. It was already late into the night. The grand banquet in Ice Stone City had finally come to an end. However, the nobles that left the banquet had different expressions on their faces. Some were excited, some were terrified, some were expectant, some were fearful. Tonight was destined to be a sleepless night. Carrier pigeons took off from Ice Stone City one after another, dispersing towards the northern frontier. They were going to deliver an earth-shattering piece of news. The eldest son of the Duke of St. Hilda, Marquis Charles, had announced that he would renounce his title under the questioning of Marquis Garcia. Charles's title was an empty title in the first place, and it didn't have any corresponding territory. What it truly represented was the inheritance rights of the Duke of St. Hilda. Renouncing this title meant that Charles had renounced his inheritance rights. Of course, strictly speaking, only when the Duke of St. Hilda approved Charles's request would he be officially stripped of his title as a marquis and lose his inheritance rights. However, what was truly thought-provoking, or perhaps even more frightening, was that Charles was forced by his own uncle to renounce his title. Since Charles wouldn't inherit the title of the Duke of the House of St. Hilda, then who would inherit it? Would it be the Duke's second son? Or would it be the Duke's younger brother? Logically speaking, as the Duke's younger brother, Marquis Garcia's inheritance rights should be behind the Duke's 3 sons, and even behind the Duke's adopted daughter, Vera. But now, no one could be sure who would inherit the title of the House of St. Hilda. And would that golden lion flag become a black lion? A terrifying storm was quietly approaching the empire's northern frontier. Some people were overjoyed, trying to take advantage of this opportunity to rise. There were also people who were deeply worried, scared out of their wits by the hidden danger. Colin quietly walked on the streets of Ice Stone City, thinking about how the Angeli family would deal with the upcoming storm. To be honest, he didn't want the northern frontier to become chaotic at this time. This was not because he was loyal to the Duke of St. Hilda, or because he sympathized with Marquis Charles, nor was he worried that this storm would involve Vera. Instead, it was because he knew very well that if the northern frontier fell into civil strife at this time, who would benefit the most? Without a doubt, it would be the trolls. After all, the 300,000 troll army on Firmament Icefield hadn't retreated very far. They might even be eyeing the northern frontier right now. Once Marquis Garcia and the Duke of St. Hilda got into a fight, the trolls would definitely take the opportunity to invade the south again. The northern frontier would also be plunged into misery and suffering. Colin did not care about the power struggles of those in power, but as a human, he certainly did not want to see the northern frontier become a place where the trolls wreaked havoc. However, it was a pity that his words carried little weight and could not change the current situation. He could only hope that the Dukes of the North, who were far away in Winter City, would retain a trace of rationality and make appropriate concessions. Colin returned to the inn, removed his armor, and fell asleep immediately. When he woke up, the sun was just right. Although the atmosphere in Ice Stone City was slightly tense, there was no chaos. It was as if everything that happened last night was just an illusion. After breakfast, Colin went out for a walk and walked his cat. Of course, Little White wasn't too willing to be walked, but Colin insisted on dragging it out. After his protests were ineffective, the angry Little White burrowed into Colin's clothes and continued to sleep. Actually, Colin was not really wandering aimlessly on the streets. He had a destination, the Church of Glory. The Church of Glory in Ice Stone City was not far from the west side of the Su Duo Castle. It was a tall tower made of pure white rock that seemed to be close to 100 meters tall. The sharp top of the tower stood upright as if it was going to pierce the sky. Colin was no longer as fearful of the Church of Glory as he was when he first transmigrated. After all, he had already drunk the holy water and even advanced because of it. Actually, when he successfully advanced into an official knight and could activate the energy of the holy light, Colin already had a guess: the vampires of this world should not be restrained by the church. Thus, he openly walked through the church's door. The guards at the door saw that Colin was dressed extravagantly and did not stop him. In the spacious prayer hall, there was no one. There were only rows of tables and chairs and a statue erected in the front row. The statue was naturally the image of the God of Glory. It was a middle-aged man wearing a simple robe. His long hair draped over his shoulders. He held a scepter in his right hand and his left hand pointed forward. The only strange thing was his face. There were no facial features. According to the church, the reason why the God of Glory did not have facial features was because he could be anyone's image: an elegant noble, a poor commoner, or even a lowly slave. Colin raised his head to look at the legendary god who protected mankind, and an inexplicable sense of familiarity suddenly emerged in his heart. He thought for a long time but could not figure out where this sense of familiarity came from. "Honorable Knight, is there anything I can help you with?" Just as Colin was thinking about the statue of the God of Glory, an old voice suddenly woke him up. "Hello, Honorable Pastor, please call me Colin." The old pastor's turbid eyes flashed slightly and smiled. "So it's Knight Colin. I've heard of your name." Colin was a little surprised. Obviously, he did not expect that he was already so famous now. The old pastor seemed to see Colin's doubts and explained with a smile, "Previously, Archbishop Raven came here and mentioned you to me." Colin suddenly realized that he had left a deep impression on Archbishop Raven. He probably remembered that he had drunk a whole bottle of pure holy water. Stingy bishop. Colin cursed in his heart, but on the surface, he looked deeply honored. "I didn't expect Archbishop Raven to remember me." "What an honor. May I know what brings you here, Knight Colin?" "Well, I actually want to buy some holy water so that I can save myself if I'm seriously injured next time." Since the last advancement, Colin had the idea of the church's holy water. Now that he had some free time, he naturally wanted to get some holy water to drink. "So that's how it is. Then please follow me." The old pastor nodded and led Colin through the prayer hall to the back hall. In fact, it was normal for the church to sell holy water. Moreover, the price was extremely expensive. The church did not feel ashamed of this, but justified it: God's gift comes with a price. The two quickly came to a small house in the back hall. The furnishings in the house were simple, with only a bathtub-sized holy water pool in the center. The surface of the pool was as smooth as a mirror, with a milky white holy light. Of course, this was holy water, but it was diluted. Colin resisted the urge to loot the church and handed the water bag to the old pastor. "Please fill it up for me." "Okay." Gulp. Gulp. The old pastor quickly filled the water bag and returned it to Colin. "Knight Colin, a total of 30 gold coins." What a scam. One had to know that this holy water was diluted, not the pure holy water that Archbishop Raven had given Colin to drink. As for how many times it was diluted. According to Colin's understanding, the church's common practice was 1,000 times. Therefore, the true content of all the holy water in the church's holy water pool in front of him was probably not as concentrated as the small bottle in Archbishop Raven's hands. And now, the entire water bag that Colin had spent a huge sum of money to buy was probably diluted from 1 or 2 drops of pure holy water. Colin felt a pang of pain, but he could only hand the 30 gold coins to the old pastor. "Let's see if it works first." Colin bid farewell to the old pastor and left the black shop. Chapter 42. Burp. Strolling on the streets of Ice Stone City, Colin rubbed his stomach and burped. He had just come out of the church and drank his fill. However, the advancement he was looking forward to didn't come. Even his body didn't heat up. Colin thought that it probably wouldn't take effect that quickly. He needed some time to react, so he waited patiently. They waited from early morning until the sun set in the west. Still no reaction. At noon, he felt a slight heat in his body. However, it wasn't obvious. Could it be that the dosage was too low? Colin was a bit confused. However, he was also a bit helpless. Last time, Archbishop Raven had extravagantly used an entire bottle of pure holy water to save him because of Vera and Marquis Garcia. Now, if he wanted to get some holy water to drink, he could only buy it with money. However, when he thought of the expensive price, Colin felt a pang of pain. He was afraid that even if the Angeli family went bankrupt, it would only be enough to buy that pool of holy water in the Church of Ice Stone City. However, with that diluted holy water, it probably wouldn't be enough for him to advance to the 3rd rank. Depressed, Colin went to the small tavern next to the hotel and ordered a cup of deer blood wine to drown his sorrows. Night once again enveloped Ice Stone City. Colin's hearing also became more sensitive at night. Therefore, the slightly drunk Colin began to sit in the tavern while eavesdropping on all kinds of gossip. After listening for a while, Colin found that the most discussed topic was the banquet last night where Marquis Garcia forced Marquis Charles to give up his title. Moreover, most of the people thought that Marquis Garcia's actions were very appropriate. Marquis Charles had to pay the price for his previous defeat. However, not many people realized how big of an impact this matter would have on the northern frontier. This wasn't surprising. After all, they were just a bunch of ignorant commoners. What did they know about politics? Many people did not really support Marquis Garcia. They just wanted to see Marquis Charles suffer. Just like how the arrest of a corrupt official would always cause the masses to cheer, the tragic experience of a superior would always give the inferior some psychological balance. As for whether this superior really deserved it or not, that was secondary. In addition to the unlucky Marquis Charles, the other person who was the most talked about in the pub was the Duke's adopted daughter, Miss Vera, who was making her first public appearance at the northern frontier. This was especially so when it was late at night and they drank more wine. Everyone gradually forgot about Marquis Charles and Miss Vera's name became the new focus of discussion. Some people even described Vera's appearance as if they had seen her with their own eyes. There were also some people who were mysteriously talking about Vera's true identity as a sorcerer, and this immediately attracted a lot of attention. Colin took a closer look at the person who had revealed Vera's identity as a sorcerer, and he found that the person looked a little familiar. He guessed that the person was someone who had experienced the Great Escape together with him. However, he did not care much about it. Among the people who had escaped together with him, Colin only wanted to find the filial son, Sar, and teach him a good lesson. However, some of the comments about Vera in the pub later attracted Colin's attention. This was because many people were speculating about Vera's biological parents. Colin suddenly discovered that Vera's biological parents seemed to be a mystery. However, since she was chosen by the Duke of St. Hilda to be his adopted daughter, Vera's biological parents must also be great nobles. Who could they be? Just as Colin was lost in his thoughts, he suddenly heard some drunkards saying very disrespectful words about Miss Vera. Some of their words were really unpleasant to the ears. Colin was furious when he heard these words and he was about to beat these idiots to a pulp. However, he found that someone had already beaten him to it. As a result, the pub instantly became lively. There were people who were fighting, people who were watching, and people who were cheering. Some of them pretended to stop the fight, but in fact, they were deliberately instigating the fight. Some of them were just watching the fight but were accidentally injured. Some of them were so excited that they even joined the fight. The whole scene was chaotic and it was full of hormones that had nowhere to vent. The owner of the pub was the only one who was trying to stop the fight with a sad face. However, these drunkards who were provoked by Vera's name could only vent their anxiety through the most primitive physical conflict. How could they be stopped by a few words of persuasion? Colin ordered another glass of deer blood wine as he sat in the corner and watched with great interest. Finally, the fierce fight attracted a team of city guards. In front of the fully armed soldiers, these drunkards suddenly lost their temper and were subdued one by one. They were then squatted on the ground to be interrogated. According to the punishment for private fights in the city, these people had to pay a fine of 30 copper coins. Otherwise, they would have to stay in prison for 10 days. Some of them paid the fine honestly. However, there were also some poor people who could not even afford 30 copper coins. There were also some who would rather stay in prison. The latter too were naturally taken away by the city guards. The pub suddenly became a lot more spacious. However, it also became a lot more boring. Colin finished his glass of wine and was about to go back to sleep when he suddenly saw an acquaintance walking in. Knight Bliss. Yes, the person who came in was the knight of the House of St. Hilda who had escaped with Colin. Knight Bliss followed the voice and found Colin. There was a rare smile on his cold face as he walked over and sat down next to Colin. Your right hand. Colin noticed that the other party's right arm was empty. After the battle at the Rapids River, Colin directly fell into a coma. Knight Bliss had received orders from Marquis Garcia and left before Colin woke up. Therefore, Colin did not know that Bliss had become a one-armed hero. It's nothing. I was injured in the battle at the Rapids River. Knight Bliss said casually. Seeing that the other party did not want to say more, Colin did not dwell on this topic and asked, "What would you like to drink?" "It's on me." "What are you drinking?" "Deer blood wine." Knight Bliss looked at Colin in surprise. It seemed that he did not expect the seemingly gentle Baron Eyre to have such a strong taste. "Then give me a cup of the same." Colin smiled and ordered a cup of deer blood wine for Bliss. After the battle at the Rapids River, where did you go? Winter City. Colin's eyes narrowed slightly and quickly asked, "Where did you go?" But he seemed to realize something and quickly added, "If it's not convenient to say, then forget it." "It's not inconvenient." After the battle at the Rapids River, Knight Bliss seemed to have recognized Colin and seemed to have a stance of not hiding anything. "I was ordered by Marquis Garcia to go to Winter City to ask the Duke for a military order." Colin thought to himself, as expected. Then he asked again, "So, what military order did you bring back?" This time, Knight Bliss hesitated slightly, but he still said, "The Duke ordered Marquis Garcia to command the Black Cavalry to pursue the Troll army that was retreating from the northern frontier." You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.